The Christmas lights were still twinkling when my father's hand connected with my face so hard that my earring flew across the room and landed in someone's champagne glass. 15 guests gasped. My mother clutched her pearls, and my younger sister Amanda. She just looked away because she knew exactly why this was happening. 20 minutes earlier, my parents had demanded I hand over the keys to my $780,000 villa. Not asked, demanded, in front of everyone, like I owed them my entire life because they'd given birth to me. When I said no, my father's face turned purple. "After everything we've done for you, everything you've done," I interrupted, my voice shaking. "We need to talk about that." That's when he hit me. The room went silent. I could taste blood, feel my cheek burning, see the pity in the guests' eyes and the fear that they might be next if they intervened. So I walked out, got in my car, and made one phone call to a woman I'd been waiting years to call. Exactly 1 hour later, she walked into that Christmas party like an avenging angel in a business suit. The moment my father saw who she was, the color drained from his face. He actually stumbled backward. Because she knew everything. And I mean everything. What my parents did to me didn't start that Christmas. It started when I was 16 years old. And over the next hour, in front of all their friends, their perfectly crafted lies would shatter like glass. But that was just the beginning of my revenge. Stick with me. Because what happened next? They never saw it coming. My name is Danielle Howard. I'm 38 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've built a successful career in real estate investment, buying undervalued properties, renovating them, and creating homes people actually want to live in. I did it all on my own without a single dollar from my family, which is exactly how I wanted it. Because accepting help from Frank and Margaret Howard always came with strings attached, and those strings had a way of turning into chains. The Christmas lights at my parents' house that night were the expensive kind, the ones that sparkle and dance in perfect synchronized patterns, the kind that scream, "Look at us, we're successful." They lined every window, wrapped around every column, transformed the front lawn into something that belonged in a magazine spread. But inside that beautiful house, beneath all that carefully curated holiday cheer, the atmosphere was as cold as the December wind rattling the windows. I should have known better than to come. I'd told myself this year would be different, that maybe after all this time they'd see me as an adult, as an equal. Instead, the moment I walked through the door in my simple navy dress, modest professional, appropriate, my mother Margaret took one look at me and said, "Oh, Danielle, you're here. Good. The caterers left the hors d'oeuvres in the kitchen. Could you bring them out? Not a greeting, not a Merry Christmas, just an assignment." My younger sister Amanda was already holding court in the living room, draped across the velvet sofa like a Renaissance painting. Her dress probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage cream silk, with gold threading that caught the light every time she moved. She had a champagne flute in one hand and was laughing at something one of the guests said, her perfectly manicured nails glinting. When I walked past carrying the tray of canapés, she didn't even look up. "That's the older daughter," I heard someone whisper to their companion. "The responsible one. Works in real estate, I think. Quiet girl. Not like Amanda, now she's going places." I'd heard variations of this my entire life. Amanda was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, even when she did everything wrong. I was the dependable one, the one who showed up and did what was expected and never caused trouble. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while Amanda was burning through her trust fund and maxing out credit cards, I'd been building an empire. 14 rental properties across 3 states, a portfolio worth over $2 million. And yes, a villa worth $780,000 that I lived in, that I'd earned through years of sacrifice and smart investments. Well, mostly earned. The truth was more complicated, but it was a truth only I knew. As the evening wore on, I moved through the party like a ghost, refilling drinks, clearing plates, smiling politely when people asked what I was up to these days, in that tone that suggested they expected the answer to be, "not much." My father Frank presided over the gathering like a king holding court, his booming laugh filling the room as he told stories about his business deals, his golf games, his important connections. My mother floated through the crowd, touching arms, air-kissing cheeks, making sure everyone saw how perfect her life was, how perfect her family was. And then, just as dessert was being served, my father cleared his throat loudly. The room fell quiet. He had that look on his face, the one that meant he was about to make an announcement, demand attention, assert his authority over whatever situation he deemed needed his control. "Danielle," he said, his voice carrying across the dining room. "Your mother and I need to speak with you, now." 15 pairs of eyes turned to watch as I set down the coffee pot I'd been holding and walked to where my parents stood near the fireplace. My father's face was flushed, whether from the wine or from anger I couldn't yet tell. My mother stood beside him, her expression carefully neutral, her hands clasped in front of her like she was posing for a portrait. "We need the keys to your villa," my father said. "Not, we'd like to discuss." Not, "We have a proposition." Just a flat statement of demand, as if my property was somehow already his to claim. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what? The villa, the one you're living in. We need it." His tone suggested this was obvious, reasonable, not worth questioning. "The family needs it. We're going through a difficult financial period, and that property could solve a lot of problems." "You want me to give you my house?" I said it slowly, making sure I understood correctly. "Don't be dramatic." My mother cut in, her voice syrupy with manufactured patience. "We're not asking you to give it to us. We just need to borrow against it. Use it as collateral for some investments your father is making. It's still yours, technically. We just need access to the equity." My mind reeled. They wanted me to hand over the deed to my home, the place I'd worked for, sacrificed for the only space in the world that was truly mine, so they could gamble with it in whatever scheme my father was running this time. "No," I said quietly. The word hung in the air like smoke. My father's face darkened. "Excuse me." I said no. "That's my house. I'm not using it as collateral for your business deals." What I didn't say, what I couldn't say in front of all these people, was that the villa wasn't just mine. 13 years ago, when I was 25 and scraping together every penny I could save my grandfather, James had called me to his lawyer's office. He was the only person in the family who'd ever truly seen me, who'd ever believed I was worth more than the role they'd assigned me. He'd just been diagnosed with the cancer that would take him 6 months later. "I'm buying you a house," he'd told me that day, sliding the paperwork across the desk. "It's going in your name. Only your name. And Danielle, I need you to promise me something. Don't tell them. Let them think you earned it all yourself. Because when the time comes when they show you who they really are, this house will prove who you really are. Someone who deserves security. Someone who deserves a home they can't take away." I'd kept that promise for 13 years. And now, standing in their decorated living room with their guests watching, I understood exactly what my grandfather had meant. "After everything we've done for you," my father started, his voice rising. "Everything you've done for me." The words came out sharper than I intended. "What exactly have you done for me, Dad?" That's when his hand came up, fast, hard. The crack of his palm against my cheek echoed through the suddenly silent room. I felt my earring, the small gold hoop I'd worn since college, fly off my ear and skitter across the hardwood floor, landing with a tiny clink in someone's champagne glass. The room froze. I could taste blood where I'd bitten the inside of my cheek. My face burned not just from the impact, but from the humiliation of it, the public nature of this violence, this final proof that to them I would always be property, to be controlled, never a person to be respected. No one moved. No one spoke. I saw pity in some faces, shock in others, but not one person stood up to intervene. Not one person said, "That's not okay." They just stared, uncomfortable witnesses, who would rather pretend they hadn't seen anything than risk getting involved. So I walked out, past the crystal stemware and the imported decorations, and the people who would gossip about this for weeks, but would never once ask if I was okay. I grabbed my coat from the hall closet, walked through the front door into the December cold, and got into my car with hands that shook so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I'd saved 8 years ago. The number of the woman who'd given it to me, and said, "When you're ready to fight, call me. I'll be waiting." She answered on the first ring. "Danielle," Evelyn Grant said, and I could hear something in her voice, not quite satisfaction, not quite sadness. Something that sounded like inevitability, like she'd known this call would come eventually, and she'd been preparing for it all along. "They hit me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "In front of everyone, and they want my house." There was a pause. Then Evelyn spoke again, and this time her voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Danielle, it's time." As I sat in my car with the phone pressed to my ear, Evelyn's words echoing in my head, I realized something I'd been avoiding for decades. This moment had been coming since I was a child. The slap wasn't the beginning. It was just the first time my father had been careless enough to do it in front of witnesses. The pattern started long before I was old enough to understand what was happening. I have this memory from when I was 7, my first clear recollection of realizing something was fundamentally wrong in my family. It was the regional science fair, and I'd spent 3 months building a working model of the solar system with motorized orbits. I was so proud of it. When the judges announced I'd won first place, I scanned the audience for my parents' faces, desperate to see them smiling, to hear them say they were proud. They weren't there. They'd gone to Amanda's soccer game instead, even though Amanda was 5 years old and playing in a recreational league where nobody kept score. When I got home that evening, clutching my blue ribbon, my mother glanced up from helping Amanda with a coloring book and said, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Put it on the fridge." The ribbon stayed there for 2 days before it disappeared, replaced by one of Amanda's crayon drawings. I found my ribbon later in the trash, crumpled beneath coffee grounds. I learned to stop expecting them at my events after that. When I made the honor roll every semester in middle school, they'd nod absently and remind me that grades weren't everything. When Amanda brought home a C+ and they threw her a celebration dinner because she'd worked so hard, I understood the rules achievement was expected from me irrelevant when received, but any minimal effort from Amanda deserved parades. The family photo albums tell the story more clearly than words ever could. I spent an afternoon once when I was in my 20s flipping through them at my parents' house. In photo after photo, I'm positioned at the edge of the frame or slightly out of focus. There are dozens of pictures where I've been cropped out entirely, birthday parties where you can see my shoulder or the edge of my dress, holidays where I'm mentioned in the caption but absent from the image. Meanwhile, Amanda is centered, lit, perfectly captured in every moment. It was as if the family photographer had been given explicit instructions: make sure we can remove Danielle if we need to. And they did need to, apparently. The official Howard family portrait that hung in their living room for 15 years featured my parents and Amanda in elegant poses against a burgundy backdrop. I wasn't in it. Not because I wasn't there for the photo session. I was standing awkwardly to the side while the photographer adjusted lights and angles. But when my mother ordered the prints, she'd selected the shots taken during my bathroom break. "You were making an odd face in all the others," she'd explained when I asked. We didn't want to waste money on reprints. But it was my mother's jealousy that poisoned everything most deeply. I didn't understand it when I was young. I just knew that whenever I wore something she considered too flattering, she'd find a reason to criticize it. "That color washes you out." "That style makes you look heavy." "Are you sure you want to wear your hair like that?" When I was 15 and a boy from school asked me to the spring dance, she spent the entire week before telling me I needed to be careful, that boys that age only wanted one thing, that I shouldn't get ideas about myself just because someone showed me attention. She made me feel dirty for being noticed, ashamed for being wanted. I didn't realize until much later, until I found photographs of my mother as a young woman, that I looked almost exactly like her at that age. Same bone structure, same dark hair, same way of tilting my head when I smiled. But where I saw beauty in those old photos of her vibrant and alive and full of possibility, she must have seen only loss. Every time she looked at me, she was confronting the woman she used to be, the dreams she'd abandoned, the life she'd traded for security and status. She'd been accepted to a prestigious art school when she was 18, I learned from my grandfather. She'd wanted to be a painter, had real talent according to him. But she'd met my father instead, gotten pregnant quickly, and married even quicker. The art school acceptance went into a drawer and stayed there. By the time I came along, whatever fire had driven her was long extinguished, replaced by a cold determination to control everything around her since she couldn't control her own disappointment. So she controlled me instead. Every career choice I made, she questioned. Real estate. That's so unstable. Wouldn't you rather do something reliable? Every relationship I pursued, she undermined. He seems nice, but are you sure he's serious about you? Men can be so fickle. Every success I achieved, she diminished. Well, that's good, but don't let it go to your head. Pride comes before a fall. She needed me to stay small, uncertain, dependent on her approval. Because if I succeeded, really succeeded, it would prove that she could have done the same if she'd just been brave enough. But the cruelest betrayal, the one I didn't discover until it was almost too late to fix, was what my father did when I was 16. I was a sophomore in high school, focused on grades and college applications, completely oblivious to the fact that my father was using my social security number to open credit card accounts and apply for loans. My credit was perfect because it was non-existent, a blank slate he could exploit without my knowledge or consent. He was careful about it. The bills went to a P.O. box he'd opened. He made minimum payments to keep the accounts from defaulting immediately. For 6 years, I had no idea I was accumulating a financial history. I'd never consented to debts I'd never incurred. It wasn't until I was 22 trying to rent my first apartment after college that the property manager pulled my credit report and looked at me with confusion. It says here you have $17,000 in outstanding credit card debt and 2 delinquent personal loans. Is that accurate? I'd sat in that rental office staring at the report with my name on it, reading about accounts I'd never opened, purchases I'd never made, leather furniture, a boat motor, casino cash advances, all in my name, all destroying the credit score I didn't even know I had. When I confronted my father, he was dismissive. I had some temporary cash flow problems. I made the minimum payments, didn't I? You should be thanking me for building your credit history. When I pushed back, he got angry. After everything we've done for you, you're going to nickel and dime your own father. Family helps family, Danielle. But we weren't family in any meaningful sense of the word. We were a hierarchy where I existed at the bottom, a resource to be extracted, a bank to be robbed, a person whose identity could be borrowed whenever convenient. I spent the next 2 years disputing charges, filing police reports that went nowhere because it's a family matter, slowly rebuilding credit that should never have been damaged in the first place. And I learned something crucial. They didn't see me as their daughter. They saw me as property, something they owned, something they could use however they needed. That was the first thing they stole from me, my financial future, my clean slate, my chance to build a life without starting from a position of debt and damage. But not the last. I met Evelyn Grant 8 years ago, though at the time I didn't understand that meeting would eventually save my life. I was 30, working a small internship at a law firm that specialized in estate planning and family trusts, trying to understand the legal frameworks that protected wealth. Evelyn was 72, then still practicing with the sharp precision of someone half her age. She had a reputation in legal circles for taking on cases other attorneys wouldn't touch: the messy family disputes, the elder abuse cases, the situations where money and manipulation tangled together in ways that destroyed lives. She noticed me immediately, though I tried my best to be invisible. That was my survival skill. Make yourself small, useful, forgettable. During a staff meeting where I'd presented research on trust fund protections, I'd apologized 3 times in the span of 2 minutes. Sorry, I just thought this might be relevant. Sorry, I don't want to take up too much time. Sorry if this isn't helpful. Evelyn had watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between concern and recognition. After the meeting, she'd asked me to her office. I'd gone with my heart pounding, certain I was about to be fired for overstepping. Instead, she'd closed the door, gestured for me to sit, and said something I'd never forgotten. "Who taught you to apologize for existing?" The question had stunned me into silence. She'd continued, "I've been practicing law for 45 years. I know the signs. The way you flinch when someone raises their voice even in normal conversation. How you downplay your own accomplishments, that research you presented was excellent, but you framed it like you were guessing. The way you position yourself near exits like you're always calculating an escape route." She'd leaned forward, her eyes sharp and knowing. "Someone hurt you. Someone still is." I'd denied it, of course, made excuses. "My family's just traditional. They have expectations." But Evelyn hadn't pushed. She'd simply handed me a card with her private number written on the back in fountain pen ink. "When you're ready to fight," she'd said, "call me. I'll be waiting." That was 8 years ago. I'd kept the card in my wallet all this time, moving it from one to the next, never quite throwing it away, but never calling either. Until tonight, sitting in my car outside my parents' house with my cheek still burning from my father's hand, I'd finally dialed those numbers. Now, the morning after Christmas, I sat in Evelyn's downtown office as winter sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. She looked older than I remembered. The cancer treatment she'd later tell me about had taken its toll, but her eyes held the same fierce intelligence, the same unwavering focus. "I've been preparing for this longer than you know," she said, opening a filing cabinet and extracting 3 thick folders. "Come to my office today. Bring nothing, I have everything we need." She spread the documents across her mahogany desk: bank statements, property records, business filings, email printouts. Years' worth of documentation meticulously organized and annotated. I stared at the papers, not understanding. 10 years ago, Evelyn explained, a man named Robert Chen hired me to investigate your father's business practices. Robert had invested $200,000 in one of Frank's commercial real estate ventures. The project never materialized. The money disappeared. Robert suspected fraud but couldn't prove it. The paperwork was too convoluted, too carefully structured to hide the theft. She tapped one of the folders. I took the case, started digging, found evidence of a pattern. Frank would lure investors with promises of high returns, use their money to pay off previous investors, pocket the difference. A classic Ponzi scheme, but small-scale enough to stay under regulatory radar. "What happened?" I asked. "Frank has friends in this town. Business partners, golf buddies, men who owed him favors or feared his retaliation. One by one, my witnesses got cold feet. Robert himself eventually dropped the case. He received an anonymous threat that his daughter's college scholarship application might encounter unexpected problems if he continued pursuing the matter." Evelyn's expression hardened. "I was forced to close the investigation, but I didn't close my files." She pulled out a timeline. She'd constructed a visual map of my father's financial crimes spanning 2 decades. "I kept monitoring, collecting newspaper articles about his business deals, tracking property transfers, noting patterns. I knew he'd eventually go too far, that his greed would overcome his caution. I just needed the right plaintiff, someone who had standing to sue someone he'd victimized so thoroughly that a jury would see through his charm, and most importantly, someone brave enough to withstand the fight." She looked at me directly. "When you walked into my office 8 years ago, I recognized your name immediately, Frank Howard's daughter. And I saw in you exactly what I'd been waiting for: intelligence, resilience, and wounds deep enough that when you were finally ready to confront the source, nothing would stop you." I felt a chill run through me. "You've been watching my family for a decade, waiting for me." "Not just watching your family," Evelyn said quietly. "Watching your mother." The way she said it made me lean forward. "What do you mean?" Evelyn was silent for a long moment, her hands folded on the desk. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of old grief. "Your mother and I grew up in the same foster home, Riverside Children's Home outside of Pittsburgh. We were there from ages 8 and 6, respectively. Different biological families, both removed for neglect. But in that place we became sisters, real sisters in every way that mattered. I couldn't process what I was hearing. My mother had always claimed she came from a respectable middle-class family, that her childhood had been conventional, even privileged. She'd mentioned parents who'd passed away before I was born, siblings scattered across the country. All of it, apparently, was fiction. Margaret was brilliant, Evelyn continued, and I heard genuine affection in her voice beneath the pain. Creative, ambitious, desperate to be more than the system told her she could be. When she aged out of foster care at 18, she was determined to erase that past completely. She changed her name not legally, just started using our foster mother's maiden name instead of the one assigned to her by the state. She created an entire backstory, invented dead parents, a childhood in the suburbs, college funds that never existed. "And you?" I asked. "I went to college on scholarships, worked my way through law school, built a career honestly. I was proud of where I came from, proud of surviving it." But Margaret saw her past as a stain to be removed. Evelyn's voice tightened. "When she met Frank and got pregnant quickly, she married him and moved here to start fresh. I didn't know where she'd gone. It took me 15 years to track her down. When I finally found her, showed up at her door hoping to reconnect with my little sister, she looked at me with absolute terror. She said if I ever contacted her again, if I ever told anyone about the foster home, she'd file a restraining order and accuse me of harassment." I sat back, the pieces falling into place. My mother's jealousy, her need to control, her desperation to maintain appearances, it all stemmed from the fear that someone would discover she wasn't who she pretended to be. "So, helping me isn't just about justice," I said slowly. "No," Evelyn agreed. "It's about saving the niece Margaret tried to destroy the way she destroyed our sisterhood. It's about breaking the cycle of shame she's perpetuated. And it's about showing her that the past she's so afraid of, the poverty, the powerlessness, matters less than the choices we make in the present." She stood up, gathering the folders. "Now, are you ready to show them exactly what happens when they underestimate you?" I thought about my grandfather's words about the villa he'd given me, about 20 years of documented abuse. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." Evelyn smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting a very long time to watch justice unfold. 1 hour later, Evelyn walked into the Christmas party that was still somehow continuing at my parents' house, extended family and close friends lingering over cocktails and gossip. And the moment my father saw who she was, every drop of color drained from his face. I stood in the doorway of my parents' living room, watching the party that should have ended last night, but had somehow continued into this afternoon. The extended family was still there. My Aunt Carol and Uncle Jim, several of my father's business associates. Neighbors from the country club, people who'd witnessed the slap, but had chosen to stay anyway, pretending everything was fine, because that's what people like them did. They pretended. Evelyn entered through the front door I'd unlocked for her, and I watched my father's face transform in real time. He was mid-sentence telling some story about a real estate deal to a circle of admirers, his whiskey glass raised in that casual gesture of authority he'd perfected over decades. Then he saw her. The glass actually shook in his hand, amber liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. All the color drained from his face, leaving him gray and suddenly older, as if someone had pulled a plug and let all his bravado drain away in an instant. He knew who she was. Of course he knew. The whispers started almost immediately among the older guests, the ones who paid attention to local news and legal gossip. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been on the museum board with my mother for years, leaned toward her husband and said in what she probably thought was a whisper, but carried across the room, "Isn't that Evelyn Grant, the attorney who brought down Mayor Richardson?" Her husband nodded slowly, his eyes widening as he made the connection. "And that developer who was stealing from his investors? And those nursing home operators who were embezzling from residents?" The name spread through the crowd like electricity. Evelyn Grant wasn't just a lawyer. She was a force of nature, someone who'd built a 45-year career on taking cases nobody else would touch and winning them with a combination of meticulous preparation and absolute fearlessness. She'd taken down a mayor, 3 city council members, half a dozen business owners, and one particularly corrupt judge. If Evelyn Grant showed up at your holiday party, you weren't getting a friendly visit. My father set his glass down carefully as if sudden movements might trigger something catastrophic. He crossed the room toward Evelyn with what he probably thought was a commanding stride, but looked more like the walk of a man heading toward his own execution. "Ms. Grant," he said, trying to inject authority into his voice and failing. "This is a private gathering, a family event. I don't know what you think you're doing here, but—" "Frank!" Evelyn interrupted, her voice calm and clear and deliberately loud enough that every person in that room could hear. She didn't move toward him. She stood in the center of the living room, right beneath the ridiculous crystal chandelier my mother had insisted on installing 5 years ago, and she commanded the space in a way my father never truly had. "This is about family, specifically what you did to your eldest daughter, and I'm afraid it won't stay hidden anymore." The room went so quiet I could hear the ice melting in someone's drink. Every eye turned toward Evelyn, then to my father, then found me standing in the doorway. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was electric with something that felt like vindication and terror in equal measure. My father tried to laugh, that dismissive chuckle he used when he wanted to make someone feel foolish. "I don't know what Danielle's been telling you, but this is a misunderstanding. A family disagreement, nothing more. She's upset because we had words last night." "You struck her across the face in front of 15 witnesses, Evelyn said flatly. "That's not having words. That's assault." Margaret appeared from the kitchen, clutching her pearl necklace like it was a life preserver. She'd perfected this pose over the years, the wounded mother, the shocked wife, the innocent victim of circumstances she couldn't possibly control. "How dare you come into our home and make accusations?" she said, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "What happened last night was a private family matter, and we don't appreciate—" "Margaret." Evelyn turned to face her, and something in her voice made my mother stop mid-sentence. "You know exactly why I'm here, and you know what I know." The implication hung in the air between them like smoke. I saw my mother's face flicker with something recognition, fear, maybe even the faintest hint of shame before she locked it down behind her usual mask. But Evelyn's words had hit their mark. Whatever secret connected them, my mother understood that the walls she'd built around her, invented past, were about to crumble. The guests were no longer pretending to be distracted. Every single person in that room was watching, now their conversations abandoned, their drinks forgotten. Several people had their phones out, though, whether they were recording or texting friends about the drama unfolding, I couldn't tell. In a community like this one, where reputation was currency and social standing determined business opportunities, church positions, club memberships, and dinner party invitations, a public confrontation like this wasn't just uncomfortable, it was catastrophic. I could see the calculation happening in real time on my parents' faces. In private, they could have spun any narrative they wanted. They could have claimed I was lying, exaggerating, being dramatic. They could have used their positions and connections to make people doubt me. But this wasn't private. This was happening in front of the people whose opinions they'd spent decades cultivating, the Pattersons who controlled most of the charitable foundation boards, the Mitchells who owned the largest construction company in the county, the Reverend Matthews from First Presbyterian, where my parents had been prominent members for 20 years. Judge Anderson, retired but still influential in legal and social circles. Every single one of these people was watching my father tremble, watching my mother clutch her pearls, watching the performance they'd maintained for so long finally irrevocably fall apart. My father tried one more time to control the situation. "Everyone, I think perhaps we should—" "Frank, I'd stop talking if I were you," Evelyn said pleasantly. "Anything you say right now will likely be used in court. And I should mention I have 17 years of documentation regarding your financial activities, including several that involve Danielle's identity, her credit, and her property rights. I'm sure you remember those." The tremor in his hand spread to his whole arm. My Uncle Jim took a step backward, suddenly very interested in distancing himself from whatever was about to unfold. The Pattersons exchanged glances and began moving toward the door with the practiced casualness of people who'd just remembered they had somewhere else to be. My mother's eyes found mine across the room. For just a moment, her carefully constructed facade cracked, and I saw genuine panic underneath. She took a step toward me, her hand outstretched, and whispered in a voice that somehow carried through the silence, "Danielle, what have you done?" I looked at my mother standing there in her designer dress, her hand still clutching those pearls, and I felt something inside me finally irrevocably break free from the weight of her expectations. "What have I done?" I repeated quietly. "I've stopped letting you steal from me." Evelyn opened the leather portfolio she'd brought with her, the kind of expensive folder that serious attorneys carry into serious courtrooms. She pulled out the first document and held it up so the entire room could see. "This is a credit card application from March 2002. Danielle Howard, 16 years old, allegedly applying for a Visa card with a $5,000 limit. The signature on this application has been analyzed by a certified handwriting expert. It doesn't match Danielle's signature. It does, however, match Frank Howard's." She set it on the coffee table and pulled out another. "This is a personal loan application from November 2003. $15,000 borrowed in Danielle's name to finance a commercial property investment that never materialized. Again, forged signature. Again, matched to Frank." More documents followed, spreading across my parents' expensive coffee table like evidence at a crime scene. Bank statements showing accounts I'd never opened. Credit card bills charging luxury items I'd never purchased. Each piece of paper was flagged with colored tabs, annotated with dates and amounts, organized with the kind of meticulous precision that told everyone in that room this wasn't a hasty accusation, this was a prosecutable case. "Over the course of 18 years, Evelyn continued, her voice steady and professional, Frank Howard opened 14 credit accounts, secured 6 personal loans, and initiated 3 home equity lines of credit, all using his daughter's identity. The total amount stolen exceeds $300,000. By the time Danielle discovered what had happened, her credit score was 487. She was 22 years old and couldn't rent an apartment, couldn't get a car loan, couldn't apply for a mortgage. Her financial life was destroyed before she was old enough to build one." Mrs. Patterson made a small sound of distress. "She had 3 adult children, I knew. The thought of doing this to any of them must have been incomprehensible to her." Judge Anderson was staring at my father with an expression I'd never seen directed at a member of this community's upper circle, undisguised disgust. My father tried to speak. "Now this is all being taken out of context. The financial arrangements in our family are complicated, and Danielle knew. I have her testimony stating she had no knowledge of any of these accounts." Evelyn cut him off smoothly. "I also have her college records showing she was in dormitories hundreds of miles away when many of these applications were filed. And I have bank records showing the money was deposited into accounts she never had access to." She paused. "But it gets worse." She pulled out another set of documents, these ones paper-clipped together with red tabs. "These are draft legal documents prepared by attorney Gerald Hutchins, who was disbarred last year for ethics violations. They outline a plan to have Danielle declared financially incompetent and place her assets under conservatorship. The proposed conservators, Frank and Margaret Howard." The room erupted in murmurs. Conservatorships were in the news constantly, now horror stories of people trapped by legal guardians who controlled every aspect of their lives. The idea that parents would do this to their own successful, competent daughter was beyond the pale. "The consultation with Hutchins took place 8 months ago," Evelyn continued. "According to his notes, which were subpoenaed as part of his disbarment proceedings, Frank and Margaret wanted to know if they could gain control of Danielle's property portfolio, specifically her villa, by having her declared unable to manage her own affairs. When Hutchins explained that would require evidence of mental incapacity or financial mismanagement, they asked if mounting debt could qualify." She looked at my father. "Debt that you, Frank, could create by taking out loans in her name. Isn't that right?" My father's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. He looked like a fish drowning in air. "So the Christmas demand for her villa wasn't a spontaneous request," Evelyn said. "It was the first move in a coordinated plan. You expected Danielle to comply out of trained obedience. If she refused, you had the conservatorship scheme as a backup. You would manufacture evidence of her financial incompetence, take control of her assets legally, and continue exploiting her indefinitely." Margaret was shaking now, her careful composure completely shattered. "You don't understand," she said, her voice high and desperate. "We were going through a difficult time financially. We needed help. Family is supposed to help family." "Help?" Evelyn's voice could have cut glass. "Let me share something else with you all." She pulled out her phone, connected it to a small portable speaker she'd brought, and pressed play. There was a moment of static, then voices emerged, tinny but unmistakable. My mother's voice sharp with frustration. "The girl owes us everything. We gave her life. Someday we'll take what's rightfully ours." Then my father, lower but equally clear. "She's too busy trying to prove herself to notice. By the time she figures it out, it'll be too late." The recording was from 8 years ago. I'd been home from college for Thanksgiving break, and I'd left my phone charging in the kitchen while I went to take a shower. My parents hadn't known it was there, recording their argument about how to manage me and my future earnings. I'd listened to it once, felt sick, and then buried it in my phone's memory, too afraid to confront what it meant. When Evelyn and I had gone through my documentation yesterday, I'd remembered it existed and found the file backed up in my cloud storage. The audio played for 30 seconds. 30 seconds of my parents discussing me like I was livestock, like I was property they'd invested in and expected returns from. When it ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Judge Anderson cleared his throat. "Frank, Margaret, I think you should stop talking immediately and retain legal counsel." Mrs. Patterson stood up, her face pale. "We should go, Harold." Her husband nodded, already moving toward the door. Others followed quickly, suddenly desperate to be anywhere but here, as if the stain of what they'd witnessed might somehow transfer to them by proximity. The Reverend Matthews paused near the door, looking at my parents with something that might have been sorrow. "I'll be praying for your souls," he said quietly. Then he looked at me. "And for your healing, Danielle." Then he too was gone. Within 5 minutes, the house had cleared. Only my immediate family remained. My parents frozen in shock, Evelyn standing guard like an avenging angel, and me by the doorway, finally able to breathe in a room that had suffocated me my entire life. Amanda appeared at the top of the stairs where she'd apparently been listening. Her face was white, her hand resting on the banister for support. "But the betrayal ran even deeper," Evelyn said, looking up at my sister. "And Amanda was the next to fall." Amanda descended the stairs slowly, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. She was wearing one of her expensive outfits, cream cashmere and silk, that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and her face was flushed with what I initially thought was embarrassment at being caught listening. But as she reached the bottom step and faced Evelyn, I realized it wasn't embarrassment. It was anger. "This is insane," Amanda said, her voice shaking but loud. "You can't just come into our home and destroy our family with your accusations. Danielle, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing here, but this is vindictive. You've always been jealous that Mom and Dad appreciated me more, and now you're trying to punish them for loving me. You're ungrateful, after everything they've done for you, after they raised you and supported you." "Amanda," Evelyn interrupted calmly, pulling another set of documents from her portfolio. "Before you continue, you should know that this folder contains bank statements from 3 credit card accounts opened in your sister's name over the past 5 years. Would you like me to read the account numbers aloud, or would you prefer to stop talking?" The color drained from Amanda's face so quickly I thought she might faint. She grabbed the banister again, her knuckles white. Evelyn continued, as if Amanda hadn't spoken, her voice taking on the clinical precision of someone reading evidence into a court record. "Account 1 Visa opened March 2019 in the name of Danielle Howard. Total charges to date $18,400. Purchases include a Louis Vuitton handbag for $3,200, multiple charges at Nordstrom Saks Fifth Avenue and Neiman Marcus for designer clothing, and a 2-week trip to Paris in June 2020, totaling $12,000 for airfare, hotels, and expenses. She pulled out the statements, each purchase highlighted in yellow. I could see them from across the room, pages and pages of things I'd never bought, places I'd never been, a life of luxury funded by theft. Account 2 American Express opened September 2020. Total charges $16,000. Notable purchases include monthly spa treatments at the Sanctuary Wellness Center averaging $1,800 per visit. Cosmetic treatments including Botox and fillers at Elite Dermatology. Weekend trips to Miami and Los Angeles. Amanda's face was no longer just pale, it was gray. She looked like she might be sick. Account 3 MasterCard opened January 2022. Total charges to date $13,000. This account appears to have been used primarily for dining at expensive restaurants and purchasing designer shoes. Evelyn set the statements down on the coffee table next to the other evidence, creating a paper trail of betrayal that was impossible to ignore. Combined total $47,400. All in your sister's name. All destroying her credit while you lived a life she was paying for without her knowledge or consent. I didn't... Amanda started, but her voice broke. She sank down onto the stairs, her carefully constructed defiance crumbling. I didn't think Mom said it was okay. She said Danielle owed us. She said it was only fair because Danielle had more money than she needed and I deserved nice things too. So you knew... I heard myself say, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. You knew you were stealing from me. Amanda looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, mascara creating dark tracks on her cheeks. She told me if I didn't stay ahead of you, she'd love you more. The words came out in a rush, desperate and broken. From the time I was little, Mom would compare us. She'd say Amanda got an A in math today. Danielle only got a B+. Amanda is trying so hard. And when you did better, when you won awards or got accepted to good schools, she'd get quiet and cold with me. She'd say, I suppose Danielle is the smart one after all. I suppose I was wrong about you. My mother made a sound, half gasp, half denial, but Amanda kept talking, the words pouring out like she'd been holding them back for decades. She created this game where only one of us could be good enough. If you succeeded, I was failing. If I succeeded, you had to be brought down. I was so scared of losing her approval, of becoming the disappointing daughter, that I did things I'm not proud of. The credit cards were just the start. Mom said it wasn't really stealing because family shares everything and you had so much that you wouldn't even notice. Evelyn's expression was unreadable, but I saw something flicker in her eyes, recognition maybe of a pattern she'd seen before. What else did you do, Amanda? Amanda wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing the mascara further. I made complaints to your employers. Anonymous ones saying you'd been inappropriate with clients or missed important meetings. Dad told me what to write, how to make it sound credible without being traceable. And when you got that job offer from the Meridian Group, the one that would have doubled your salary, I intercepted the letter. It came to Mom and Dad's house because you'd used their address on your resume for some reason, and Dad gave it to me and said I should throw it away. He said if you got too successful, you'd leave town and never help the family again. He said I had to keep you. Manageable. The word hung in the air like poison. Manageable. That's what I'd been to them my entire life. Not a daughter, not a sister, but a resource to be managed, controlled, exploited. That job would have changed my life, I said quietly. I called them 3 times asking about the position. They said they'd sent an offer and were disappointed I hadn't responded. I thought they were lying to save face after choosing someone else. I'm sorry, Amanda whispered. I'm so sorry. But she made me believe that if I didn't do these things, I'd lose everything. That you were the enemy. That your success meant my failure. For a moment, her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, resting there in a gesture I'd seen pregnant women make 1,000 times. Then she seemed to realize what she was doing and quickly dropped her hand, her eyes darting to our mother. Margaret's face had gone white, and I saw something pass between them, a silent communication that told me there was more to this story, something Amanda was still hiding. Evelyn noticed it too. I could see her filing it away, that small gesture, and the panic it provoked. "So you were manipulated," Evelyn said, her voice not unkind but firm. "That doesn't erase what you did. It explains it, but it doesn't excuse it. You're 33 years old, Amanda. At some point, you have to take responsibility for your own choices." Amanda nodded, still crying. I know I do. But I was watching my mother now, seeing the way she was backing slowly toward the kitchen, the way her hands were trembling, the absolute terror in her eyes. Because Amanda had been weaponized against me, yes, but she'd been a willing weapon. And the person who'd forged that weapon, who'd spent decades creating a toxic dynamic that pitted sisters against each other, who'd orchestrated this entire nightmare, she was still standing there, still trying to find a way to escape accountability. Evelyn turned to face Margaret fully, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of anger and disappointment. But the ugliest secret belonged to my mother. My mother had been slowly backing toward the kitchen throughout Amanda's confession, as if distance might somehow protect her from what was coming. But Evelyn moved to block her path, and Margaret froze, trapped between the dining room and living room with nowhere left to retreat. "Let's talk about the scholarship," Evelyn said, pulling out yet another folder from her seemingly endless portfolio. "The Danforth Academic Excellence Scholarship offered to Danielle Howard in March 2004. Full ride to Northwestern University tuition room, board books, everything paid for 4 years. One of only 50 students nationwide selected that year." I felt the room tilt. "What scholarship?" Evelyn handed me a photocopy of a letter on official university letterhead. I read the words, "Congratulations, exceptional academic achievement, full financial support," and felt something inside me crack open. I'd applied to Northwestern. I'd wanted to go so badly, I'd spent weeks on the application, written and rewritten my essays, gotten teacher recommendations. When I never heard back, I'd assumed I was rejected. I'd gone to the state school instead, worked 2 jobs to pay for it, graduated with debt that took me years to clear. On March 24, 2004, Evelyn continued, "The scholarship committee received a phone call from someone identifying herself as Danielle Howard. The caller stated that she had decided to decline the scholarship and would not be attending Northwestern. The committee was surprised, but noted the decision. They sent a follow-up letter to confirm, which was returned marked, 'Refused.'" She pulled out phone records highlighted in pink. "The call came from this house, from your landline, Margaret, at 10:17 in the morning, a time when Danielle was provably at school taking her AP chemistry exam." My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You called them," I said slowly, understanding blooming like a bruise. "You pretended to be me. You turned down a full scholarship to one of the best universities in the country." "You were going to leave," Margaret whispered, and her voice was small and desperate. "You were going to go to Chicago and never come back. I couldn't let you go." Evelyn wasn't finished. She pulled out another stack of letters, these ones in plastic protective sleeves like evidence in a crime scene. "But that wasn't the only opportunity Margaret stole from you." She laid them out on the coffee table one by one, a paper trail of theft that took my breath away. "This is an internship offer from the State Department, summer 2005. This is a recruitment letter from a Fortune 500 company, 2007. This is an invitation to interview for a competitive graduate program in urban planning at MIT, 2008. This is a notification that you'd won a grant from the National Association of Realtors for Emerging Professionals, 2011. Each letter was pristine, unopened, addressed to me at my parents' house, because I'd still been using their address for important mail back then, not realizing my mother was intercepting anything that looked significant. 12 letters total, spanning a decade. 12 doors that had opened for me that I'd never known existed, because my mother had slammed them shut before I could even see them. "Where did you find these?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "In a locked box in your mother's bedroom closet," Evelyn said, My investigator discovered it during a legal search last month when we were looking for Frank's financial documents. She had kept them, all of them, like trophies. I looked at my mother, this woman who'd given birth to me, who'd raised me, who'd spent 38 years systematically destroying every chance I had to become anything more than what she needed me to be. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you do this?" Margaret's carefully constructed facade finally shattered completely. "You don't understand!" she screamed, and the sound was raw and horrible. "I came from nothing. Foster care, poverty, shame, sleeping in beds that smelled like other people's urine because the system didn't care enough to give us clean sheets. I had nothing. No family, no money, no future. When I met your father, when I got pregnant with you, I saw a way out. I could be someone new, someone respectable, someone with a history that didn't include donated clothes and free lunch tickets and social workers who looked at me like I was garbage." She was crying now, mascara running down her face just like Amanda's had minutes before. "I built this life by erasing who I was. I changed my name, invented dead parents, created a past that people would respect. And it worked. For years it worked. I became Margaret Howard, wife of a successful businessman, member of the country club, volunteer at the hospital auxiliary. No one knew, no one suspected." "And then Danielle grew up," Evelyn said quietly. "And then you grew up," Margaret echoed, looking at me with something that might have been anguish or might have been hatred. "You succeeded effortlessly. You didn't have to hide or pretend or erase yourself. You were smart and capable, and people noticed you, and you did it all while being exactly who you were. Every time I saw you excel, every time you won an award or got accepted somewhere prestigious or achieved something real, I saw the girl I used to be. The one I buried because I thought I had to. The one who could have been something if she'd just been brave enough." Her voice broke. "I couldn't let you prove I was wrong. Don't you see? If you succeeded without hiding, without pretending, without erasing your past, then everything I sacrificed was for nothing. Every lie I told, every person I cut out of my life, every piece of myself I killed to become someone acceptable, it would all be pointless, because you would have proven there was another way." She sank into a chair, her whole body shaking. "So I kept you small. I kept you close. I made sure you'd always need me, always come back, always be just successful enough to make me feel superior, but never successful enough to leave me behind. Because if you left, if you became everything you could have been, you'd be proof that I destroyed myself for nothing." The room was completely silent. Even Amanda had stopped crying, staring at our mother with something like horror in her eyes. Evelyn looked at her sister, her actual biological sister who'd abandoned her to chase respectability, with an expression of profound sadness. "You didn't destroy yourself, Margaret. You destroyed your daughter, and me, and any chance we had to be family. All because you were too afraid to accept that your past didn't define your worth." Margaret didn't respond. She just sat there, broken and exposed. The carefully constructed lie of her life finally collapsed into rubble. I felt numb. All those years, all those near misses and almosts and disappointments I'd attributed to bad luck or poor timing, they'd been deliberate, calculated. My own mother had spent decades making sure I'd never fly too high, never see too far, never become too much. Yet the secret that changed everything came from someone long gone. I was still processing my mother's confession, trying to understand how someone could be so consumed by their own shame that they'd spend decades poisoning their child's life, when Evelyn reached into her portfolio and pulled out a document that looked different from the others. This one was older, the paper slightly yellowed, bound in a blue legal folder with an official seal. "There's one more thing you need to see," Evelyn said, and something in her voice made everyone in the room go still. "This is the last will and testament of James Robert Howard, executed on November 3rd, 2009, 1 week before his death. Filed with the county probate court on November 18th, 2009, and witnessed by 2 attorneys and a notary public." My grandfather. The only person in my family who'd ever made me feel seen, who'd called me on my birthday every year, who'd told me I was smart and capable and worthy. He'd died 15 years ago from pancreatic cancer, and I'd grieved him like I'd lost the only anchor I had. Evelyn opened the document and began to read in a clear, formal voice. I, James Robert Howard, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make this my last will and testament. To my daughter Margaret Howard and her husband Frank Howard, I leave nothing. They have shown themselves to be motivated by greed and cruelty, and I will not reward such behavior with my life's work. My mother made a choking sound. My father's face went completely white. Evelyn continued reading. To my granddaughter Danielle Howard, the only member of this family with integrity and courage, I leave the entirety of my estate, my investment properties located at 4420 Maple Drive and 887 Lakewood Avenue, my savings accounts at First National Bank, my stock portfolio managed by Hendricks Financial, and my personal effects. I trust she will use these resources wisely and kindly, as she has always conducted herself with wisdom and kindness, even when those around her did not. The words hung in the air. My grandfather had left everything to me, not split between his daughter and granddaughter, not divided among family members. Everything to me with explicit language excluding my parents. The total value of the estate at the time of death was approximately $800,000, Evelyn said, including the funds that were used to purchase the villa that's currently in Danielle's name. I remembered that conversation with my grandfather in his lawyer's office 13 years ago when I was 25. He'd said he was buying me a house, that it would be in my name, only that I shouldn't tell my parents. I'd thought it was his savings, maybe $100,000 he'd set aside. I hadn't known about the full estate, about the other properties and investments. He'd protected me even then, giving me the villa outright so my parents couldn't claim it was part of a larger inheritance they deserved to share. But I never saw that will, I said. When Grandpa died, Mom and Dad handled everything. They said there wasn't much to inherit, that most of his money had gone to medical bills. Because they hid it, Evelyn said. She pulled out another document, this one clearly forged. The signatures didn't quite match. The paper was newer despite being dated the same year. This is the will they presented to the probate court initially. It leaves everything to Margaret, with a small bequest of $10,000 to Danielle. But the clerk who processed it noticed discrepancies and pulled the original filing. That's when things got interesting. She produced a series of emails and official complaints. Frank attempted to bribe the court clerk, a woman named Susan Chen, to lose the original will and process only the forged version. He offered her $5,000. Susan reported him immediately, which triggered an investigation by the county prosecutor's office. What happened to that investigation? I asked. It stalled. Frank had connections, friends in the business community. A lawyer who knew how to delay proceedings, witnesses who suddenly became unavailable. The prosecutor's office had other priorities, bigger cases, so it sat in a file for years, technically open but essentially dormant. Evelyn smiled grimly. Until I reopened it last month and provided them with all the additional evidence of Frank's financial crimes. Suddenly they're very interested again. My father looked like he might be sick. You can't prove I wrote that second will. Actually, we can. The forensic document examiner's report is quite conclusive. The paper stock wasn't even manufactured until 2011, 2 years after your father-in-law died. You're not very good at forgery, Frank. I was still trying to process it all. My grandfather had left me everything. He'd seen what was happening, understood that my parents were poisoning my life, and he'd tried to give me a way out. And they'd stolen that, too. There's one more thing, Evelyn said gently, handing me a sealed envelope that had been tucked inside the will's folder. This was in the original filing. It's addressed to you. My hands were shaking as I took it. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive paper, and my name was written across the front in my grandfather's familiar handwriting, precise and slightly slanted, the way he'd learned to write in Catholic school in the 1950s. I opened it carefully, afraid it might disintegrate after 15 years. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in the same handwriting. "Read it aloud," Evelyn said softly. "He wanted you to know you weren't alone." I took a breath and began to read, my voice wavering. "My dearest Danielle, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and I hope you've lived long enough to realize that your strength will cost you their love. But that's not a loss, that's freedom. You were never meant to fit into their small world. You were meant to build your own." My voice cracked, but I continued. "I have watched my daughter try to break you since you were a child. I have watched her jealousy poison every achievement, watched her fear turn to cruelty. I have watched your father use you as a resource rather than cherish you as a person. And I have watched you survive it all with a grace and strength that humbles me." Tears were streaming down my face now, but I kept reading. "The money I leave you is not charity. It's an apology for not protecting you more while I lived. I should have confronted them. I should have taken you away from that house. Instead, I was a coward, afraid that if I pushed too hard, they'd cut me off from you entirely. So I did what I could. I gave you this foundation. Use it to fly far from the people who tried to clip your wings. Use it to build the life they tried to prevent you from having." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. "I see you, Danielle. I've always seen you. The real you, brilliant, kind, resilient, worthy of love that doesn't come with conditions or costs. And I'm so very proud. Never doubt that someone loved you exactly as you are. Never doubt that you deserved better. And never doubt that the strength you've built through surviving them will carry you through anything life brings. With all my love, Grandpa James." The silence in the room was absolute. I looked up from the letter through my tears and saw that Amanda was crying too, and even Evelyn had moisture in her eyes. The letter wasn't just words on paper. It was proof that I hadn't imagined the abuse hadn't been too sensitive or dramatic. Someone had witnessed it all and had tried to save me the only way he knew how. My mother was staring at the floor, her face hidden behind her hands. My father was gripping the arm of his chair so hard his knuckles were bone white. And I realized that my grandfather had given me something even more valuable than money. He'd given me validation, vindication, proof that I deserved protection, deserved love, deserved a future that wasn't defined by their dysfunction. That letter became the foundation of my revenge. Not because it made me angry, though it did, but because it made me understand that I had been worth saving all along, and now I had the resources and the righteousness to save myself. After my parents left their own house, my father storming out to his car, my mother following. In stunned silence, Amanda disappearing upstairs. Evelyn and I sat alone in that perfectly decorated living room that had always felt like a stage set rather than a home. The Christmas lights were still twinkling outside, absurdly cheerful against the wreckage of the evening. "There's something I need to show you," I said, pulling out my laptop from my bag. "Something I haven't told anyone." Evelyn watched as I opened a folder buried 3 levels deep in my documents, protected by 2 passwords, and backed up in 3 separate cloud accounts. The folder was labeled simply, Evidence 2010-2025. Inside were subfolders organized by year, then by category: financial documents, email, correspondence, voice recordings, photographs, written logs. Hundreds of files, maybe thousands, each one carefully named with dates and brief descriptions. 15 years of documentation meticulously maintained and constantly updated. Evelyn leaned forward, scrolling through the file names. Her eyes widened. "When did you know?" "I suspected something was wrong when I was 22. I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through me. "I was applying for my first apartment and the landlord pulled my credit report. That's when I saw the accounts I'd never opened, the debt I'd never incurred. My credit score was 487. I couldn't rent a decent apartment. I couldn't get a car loan. I was barely out of college and my financial life was already destroyed." I opened one of the earliest subfolders showing scanned copies of those first devastating credit reports, annotated with my notes about which accounts I'd disputed and which creditors had refused to help. I confronted Dad about it. He dismissed me, said he'd made minimum payments so I should be grateful. Said family helps family. But something in his tone, the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes, I knew it was worse than he was admitting. "So, you started collecting evidence," Evelyn said quietly. "Everything. Every time they called asking for money, I recorded it. Every email where they used guilt or manipulation, I forwarded to this account. Every visit home, I took photos of paperwork left lying around. Every voicemail, every text message, every bank statement I could access. I created spreadsheets tracking their requests, dates, amounts, reasons, given promises made and broken." I pulled up one of the spreadsheets showing a color-coded timeline that spanned over a decade. By the time I was 28, I had enough evidence to act. I could have gone to the police, hired a lawyer, exposed everything. "But you didn't," Evelyn observed. "No, because I realized if I acted too soon, they could claim it was a misunderstanding, a family disagreement over money. They could say I was vindictive or dramatic. They'd use their connections and community standing to spin the narrative. So I waited. I let them keep taking, keep manipulating, keep assuming I was too busy or too naive to notice. And I documented every single instance. I wanted them to go so far, to be so blatant in their exploitation, that when the truth finally came out, no one could deny what they were." Evelyn sat back looking at me with something approaching awe. "You've been building a case for 15 years. "I've been building an airtight case," I corrected. "One they can't lie their way out of, can't minimize, can't explain away as normal family dynamics. I was patient, and now we have everything we need." Over the next 2 days, Evelyn assembled a team that transformed my carefully organized evidence into a legal weapon. She brought in Marcus Chen, a forensic accountant, who specialized in financial fraud, to trace every dollar my father had stolen and identify patterns in his schemes. Marcus spread my documents across Evelyn's conference room table and worked through them methodically, his expression growing darker as he uncovered the full scope of the theft. "It's not just identity theft," Marcus reported on the second day. "Frank took out a home equity loan against your villa using forged documents, $50,000 secured against your property. If you'd missed payments on debts you didn't know existed, you could have lost the house to foreclosure." I felt ice in my stomach. My grandfather's gift, the one thing I'd thought was safe, had nearly been stolen too. Evelyn also hired Sarah Hendricks, a data analyst who specialized in organizing evidence for major trials. Sarah took my 15 years of documentation and transformed it into visual presentations, timelines, and summaries that would be comprehensible to juries and judges. She created a timeline showing the pattern of abuse from my childhood through the present, with every instance marked and cross-referenced. The private investigator, a former FBI agent named Thomas Wright, did something even more valuable. He identified 3 other victims of my father's business schemes. People who'd lost money in real estate deals that never materialized, investments that disappeared, partnerships that turned out to be sophisticated theft. These people had been too intimidated to come forward, afraid of my father's connections and potential retaliation. With their testimony, Evelyn explained, this stops being a family dispute and becomes criminal conspiracy. The pattern is undeniable. Your father has been doing this to multiple people for decades. We coordinated with Kate Morrison, a criminal defense attorney who actually specialized in prosecution but agreed to consult on our case. Kate reviewed everything and confirmed we had enough for multiple felony charges, identity theft, fraud, forgery, attempted extortion, and potentially even racketeering if we could prove my father's business dealings constituted an ongoing criminal enterprise. As our team worked, Evelyn and I developed our 3-part strategy in her office late one evening, Chinese takeout containers scattered across her desk. "First, legal action," Evelyn said, writing on her whiteboard. "Criminal charges through the district attorney's office, plus civil lawsuits for damages, restitution of the stolen inheritance, and compensation for emotional distress." "Second, public exposure," I added. We control the narrative from the start. Media coverage before they can spin it. That investigative journalist you mentioned, the one who covers white-collar crime, we give her the full story. We make sure everyone in this community knows exactly what Frank and Margaret Howard did to their daughter for 38 years. And third, Evelyn prompted. Community restitution. I said, the idea crystallizing as I spoke. I don't just want them punished. I want to help the people they hurt who couldn't fight back. The other victims Thomas identified, we helped them file charges, recover losses if possible, and we set up resources for other people trapped in similar situations. Financial abuse hotlines, legal aid, education programs. We turn this into something larger than personal revenge. Evelyn studied me for a long moment. This isn't just about getting justice for yourself anymore. It never was, I said quietly. My grandfather's letter said I was meant to build my own world. This is how I build it, by making sure other people have the tools to escape the worlds that are destroying them. Evelyn smiled, and it was the fierce, proud smile of someone watching a student surpass the teacher. Then, let's begin. That night, as I drove home to my villa with my laptop full of evidence and my grandfather's letter folded carefully in my wallet, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just anger or determination, but certainty. Absolute certainty that what I was doing was right, that the years of documentation and patience had been worth it, that the moment my grandfather had prepared me for had finally arrived. I called Evelyn just before midnight. File everything tomorrow. Contact the DA, the media, the courthouse. I'm ready. Are you sure? She asked. Once we start this, there's no going back. I'm sure, I said. Let's show them exactly what happens when you underestimate the person you tried to destroy. And that night, the first domino fell. The morning after I gave Evelyn the go-ahead, she filed emergency motions with 3 banks. First National, where my father had his primary business accounts. Cascade Credit Union, where he'd opened several of the fraudulent credit cards in my name. And Western Alliance Bank, which held the home equity line he'd illegally secured against my villa. Each motion included a comprehensive evidence package, copies of my identity documents, proof I'd never authorized the account's forensic analysis of the forged signatures, and my own sworn affidavits detailing the timeline of discovery. The legal process wasn't the dramatic overnight freeze I'd imagined from watching crime shows. It was methodical, bureaucratic, frustratingly slow. Each bank had its own procedures, its own legal department that needed to review the evidence, its own timeline for compliance. Evelyn had warned me this would take time. 10 days minimum, she'd said. Maybe 2 weeks. Banks move carefully when fraud allegations are involved. They need to verify everything, protect themselves legally, coordinate with law enforcement. We have to be patient. But while we waited, my parents weren't being patient at all. Marcus, the forensic accountant, had set up monitoring on the accounts we knew about, watching for suspicious activity. On day 3, he called Evelyn's office in the middle of our strategy meeting. They're moving money, he said, his voice tight. Frank just initiated a wire transfer. $200,000 to an account at Cayman National Bank. He's trying to get assets offshore before we can freeze them. I felt my stomach drop, but Evelyn just smiled grimly. Let him try. She'd already anticipated this move. 2 weeks earlier, before we'd even confronted my parents at Christmas, Evelyn had filed a suspicious activity report with FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, a bureau of the U.S. Treasury Department that tracks money laundering and financial crimes. The report had flagged my father's accounts for potential fraud and identity theft, creating automatic alerts on any large or unusual transactions. When Frank attempted that wire transfer, the system caught it immediately. The transaction was blocked before the money left U.S. soil, and a notification was automatically sent to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Instead of hiding his money, my father had just provided federal evidence of attempting to move potentially stolen funds out of the country. He just upgraded this from local fraud to federal investigation territory, Marcus said with something like admiration in his voice. That was spectacularly stupid. Over the next week, I watched the financial walls close in around my parents with a satisfaction that felt almost physical. The banks, after reviewing Evelyn's evidence packages and conducting their own internal investigations, began freezing accounts one by one. First, the obvious ones, the credit cards opened in my name, the fraudulent personal loans. Then the accounts my father thought were safe, his business checking account where evidence showed he'd deposited funds stolen from other victims, the joint savings account with my mother, which had been funded partially with money from my grandfather's estate that should have come to me. The home equity line secured against my villa was canceled entirely. The bank acknowledged that the paperwork was fraudulent, the signatures forged, and Danielle Howard Me had never consented to encumbering her property. They apologized for their failure to properly verify the documents initially and assured me the debt would not appear on my credit report. By day 8, my parents had no access to liquid funds. I heard about what happened next through the community gossip network that Evelyn's assistant, a woman with connections to everyone in town, monitored carefully. Frank's mortgage payment bounced. The bank called and he had to explain that there was a temporary problem with the account. His country club membership fee, automatically withdrawn monthly, was declined. The club manager called to inquire, and Frank had to request a payment plan, something that had never happened in the 20 years they'd been members. Margaret tried to use a credit card at her favorite restaurant, the upscale French place where she had lunch with her friends every Thursday. The card was declined. She tried another, also declined. Finally, she had to call Frank to bring cash, humiliating herself in front of 3 women she'd known for 15 years. Frank wrote a check to their attorney. They'd retained Douglas Pemberton, an expensive lawyer who specialized in defending white-collar criminals. The check bounced. Pemberton called and very politely informed Frank that he couldn't continue representation without a valid retainer. Frank would need to pay in cash or certified check before Pemberton would file any responses to the lawsuits that were coming. The Whisper Network in their social circle noticed everything. The Howards, always so perfectly put together, so financially comfortable, were suddenly scrambling. People talked. Of course they talked. Mrs. Patterson mentioned to someone at book club that she'd heard the Howards were having money troubles. That someone told someone else who told her husband, who played golf with Judge Anderson, and within 3 days, the entire community knew something was seriously wrong with Frank and Margaret Howard's finances. On the 10th day after Christmas, January 4th, certified letters arrived at my parents' house. I knew this because Evelyn had tracking numbers for all of them, and we watched the delivery confirmations pop up on her computer screen at 2:47 p.m. The first letter was from First National Bank informing Frank and Margaret that accounts ending in 4892, 7731, and 345 were frozen pending investigation of fraud allegations. The second was from Cascade Credit Union, notifying them that all credit products in the name of Danielle Howard had been closed, and the associated debts totaling $63,000 had been reassigned to Frank and Margaret Howard as the actual users of the accounts. The third letter was from Evelyn's law firm, formally notifying them of pending civil lawsuits for identity theft, fraud, conversion of inheritance assets, and emotional distress with damages sought exceeding $500,000. The fourth letter was the one I'd been waiting for. It came from the district attorney's office informing Frank and Margaret that a criminal investigation had been opened based on evidence of identity theft, financial fraud, and forgery. They were advised to retain criminal defense counsel and to expect contact from detectives within the week. I wasn't there to see their faces when they opened those letters, but Amanda called me that evening. She'd moved out that morning, taking what little she could fit in her car and leaving the rest behind. Dad's sitting in his office with all the letters spread out on his desk, she said quietly. He's just staring at them, not moving. Mom's been crying for hours. She keeps saying, "This isn't happening. This can't be happening." But it is happening. Everything you said would happen is happening. Do you understand why? I asked. I do now, Amanda said. I'm sorry I didn't before. After we hung up, I sat in my villa, the house my grandfather had protected, the house they'd tried to steal, the house that was now completely, legally, irrevocably mine, and felt something shift inside my chest. For 38 years, they'd controlled me through fear. Fear of disappointing them, of losing whatever scraps of love they offered, of being alone. Now they were the ones afraid. Afraid of prison, of bankruptcy, of public humiliation, of losing everything they'd built on a foundation of lies and theft. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had completely inverted. And this was only the beginning of what I had planned. But the world would soon know the truth. 3 days after the certified letters arrived, Evelyn called me with news that made my heart race. Sarah Chen wants to publish. Tomorrow morning. Front page of the digital edition above the fold in print. Are you ready for this? Sarah Chen was a legend in investigative journalism. She'd spent 20 years exposing corruption, financial fraud, and systemic abuse in institutions that thought they were untouchable. She'd brought down a mayor, exposed nursing home fraud rings, and revealed family court judges who took bribes to award custody to abusive parents. When Evelyn had mentioned our case to her weeks ago before the Christmas confrontation, when we were still in the planning stages, Sarah had been immediately interested. Parental financial abuse of adult children is one of the most underreported crimes in America, Sarah had told me during our first interview. People understand elder abuse, they understand child abuse. But somehow when the victim is an adult and the abuser is a parent, society tells them it's just family drama. It's not. It's crime. And your story needs to be told. We'd spent hours together over the past 3 weeks. She'd interviewed me extensively, reviewed every public document Evelyn could provide, spoken with experts on family exploitation and financial fraud, even talked to some of my father's other victims that Thomas Wright had identified. She'd been meticulous, empathetic, and relentlessly thorough. Now her article was ready to publish. The Invisible Theft: How One Woman's Family Stole Her Identity for Decades. I gave her my permission, and the next morning at 6 a.m., the article went live. By 8 a.m., it had been shared 4,000 times. By noon, over 50,000. By evening, it was trending on 3 different social media platforms and had been picked up by national news outlets. Sarah's writing was devastating in its clarity. She laid out the timeline of abuse starting from my childhood, describing the systematic erasure, the favoritism toward Amanda, the way I'd been trained to accept mistreatment as normal. She detailed the financial crimes with specific dollar amounts and dates, making the theft concrete rather than abstract. She included quotes from experts explaining how parental financial abuse works, how it's hidden by family loyalty and shame, how victims often don't realize they have legal recourse. But what made the article go viral wasn't just the facts. It was the way Sarah framed my story as emblematic of something larger. The invisible labor and invisible theft that happens when families view certain members as resources rather than people. While Danielle Howard was building a $2 million real estate portfolio through discipline and sacrifice, Sarah wrote, her parents were simultaneously stealing her identity, sabotaging her opportunities, and planning to legally seize her assets through a conservatorship scheme. She succeeded not because of her family, but despite them. She is the definition of a self-made woman, someone who built everything from nothing, while the people who should have protected her actively worked to tear her down. The comments section exploded. Women shared their own stories of family financial abuse, of parents who'd stolen from them, siblings who'd been favored opportunities that had been blocked by jealous relatives. Men shared stories too, but the overwhelming majority of responses came from women who recognized themselves in my experience. My mother did this to me. Opened credit cards, destroyed my credit, then told me I was ungrateful when I confronted her. I'm 62 years old and I just realized my father's borrowing from me for 30 years was actually theft. This happened to my daughter. Thank you for giving her a name for what she experienced. The hashtag started within hours. Hashtag Stand with Danielle. Hashtag Survivor Not Victim. Hashtag Invisible Theft. By the second day, my case was being discussed on morning talk shows, true crime podcasts, financial advice programs. I became without quite meaning to the face of a conversation America needed to have about family exploitation. Local news stations showed up at Evelyn's office at my villa, even at my parents' house. I gave one carefully scripted interview to the local NBC affiliate, keeping my composure as I explained that I was speaking out not for revenge, but to help other people recognize financial abuse and know they had options. The clip played on the evening news for 3 straight days. Within a week, everyone in my community knew my face and my story. But more importantly, everyone knew my parents' faces and their crimes. The social consequences came swift and merciless. First, Presbyterian Church, where my parents had been prominent members for 20 years, where my mother had served on the Women's Auxiliary, and my father had been on the building committee, quietly asked them not to attend services while this matter is being resolved. The request was framed as concern for avoiding disruption to our worship community, but everyone understood what it meant. They were no longer welcome. The Riverside Charity Foundation, where my mother had volunteered and served as event coordinator for their annual gala, sent a formal letter requesting her resignation. Given the current circumstances and the nature of the allegations, we feel it's best for the organization if you step back from your duties. Margaret had loved that position. It had given her status, made her feel important. Now it was gone. My father's business partnerships dissolved with remarkable speed. The men he'd golfed with, the investors he'd courted, the colleagues who'd attended his Christmas parties, they all found reasons to distance themselves. Contracts were quietly terminated. Joint ventures were unwound. Phone calls went unreturned. Within 2 weeks, Frank Howard went from well-connected businessman to social pariah. I heard about all of this through Amanda, who called me every few days with updates. She'd moved into a small apartment across town and was trying to figure out how to build a life separate from our parents for the first time ever. Mom sits in the living room all day, Amanda told me. She doesn't get dressed. She doesn't answer the phone. I stopped by yesterday to pick up some things I'd left behind, and she was just sitting there in her bathrobe staring at her phone, reading the comments on Sarah's article over and over again. It's like she's torturing herself. And Dad, he's angry. He keeps saying it's all lies, that you're destroying the family out of spite. But I don't think even he believes that anymore. People he thought were friends cross the street to avoid talking to him. The Johnsons, who've been their neighbors for 15 years, put their house up for sale. Dad thinks it's because they don't want to live next to criminals, even though technically he hasn't been convicted of anything yet. I felt a complex mix of emotions hearing this. Not quite satisfaction, not quite pity. Maybe recognition that this isolation, this social death, was a taste of what I'd experienced my entire life. I'd been invisible, erased, excluded. Now they were experiencing their own version of erasure as the community that had once elevated them now shunned them. But I took no joy in my mother's bathrobe despair or my father's angry isolation. What I felt was something sadder and more final confirmation that the relationships they'd built were as hollow as their version of family. The people who'd praised them, socialized with them, partnered with them, none of those people cared enough to ask if there might be another side to the story. They just disappeared, protecting their own reputations by cutting ties with anyone tainted by scandal. I was home reviewing documents for the upcoming civil case when Amanda called again. Her voice was shaking. "Danielle," she said. "The police are at the house. 2 detectives. They're at the front door right now. Dad's trying to tell them to come back with a warrant, but they're saying they just want to ask some questions. Mom's crying. I thought you should know." I thanked her and hung up. Then I called Evelyn. "It's happening," I said. "Yes," she replied. "It is." Then the police knocked on their door. I was sitting in Evelyn's office when the call came from Detective Maria Rodriguez. She'd been assigned to lead the financial crimes investigation, and over the past week we'd developed a professional rapport built on her methodical approach and my comprehensive evidence. "We're at their residence now," Detective Rodriguez said. "My partner and I will be conducting preliminary interviews. I wanted you to know the process is officially underway." Through Amanda's subsequent phone calls, and later through official channels, I learned exactly how that interview went. Detectives Rodriguez and James Park arrived at my parents' house at 4:30 p.m. on a gray January afternoon. They were professional, polite, but unmistakably serious. Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran of financial crimes investigation. Park specialized in white-collar fraud. Together, they'd seen every variation of family financial exploitation, every excuse, every deflection tactic criminals used when confronted. My father tried to control the situation immediately. "Do you have a warrant?" he demanded, standing in the doorway as if physical presence could intimidate them into leaving. "We're not here to search your home, Mr. Howard," Detective Rodriguez said calmly. "We're here to ask you some questions about allegations of identity theft, fraud, and assault. You're not under arrest, but we do need to speak with you and your wife. You're welcome to have an attorney present." My mother appeared behind my father, her face pale and puffy from days of crying. "This is harassment," she said, her voice shaking. "Our daughter is lying about us, trying to destroy our reputation, and you're helping her." Detective Park pulled out a tablet and brought up documents on the screen. "Ma'am, we're not here based on allegations alone. We have substantial evidence. Bank records, forged documents, witness statements, audio recordings. This is a criminal investigation. We'd like you both to come to the station to provide formal statements." They went. What choice did they have? Refusing to cooperate would only make them look guilty, and my father still believed he could talk his way out of anything if given the chance to explain, to spin, to redirect blame. At the station in separate interview rooms, the detectives presented their evidence methodically. My father sat across from Detective Rodriguez with his hastily retained attorney, a younger lawyer named Patterson who specialized in DUI cases and was clearly out of his depth with financial crimes. "Mr. Howard," Rodriguez began sliding a loan application across the table. "This is a personal loan application dated March 15th, 2015. It's in the name of Danielle Howard. The signature at the bottom is that your daughter's signature." My father barely glanced at it. "This is a misunderstanding. Sometimes in families we help each other with paperwork. I might have signed for her if she was busy." Without her knowledge or permission? She knew about it. Rodriguez slid another document across the table. "This is a sworn affidavit from your daughter stating she never authorized any accounts in her name, never gave you permission to use her identity, and only discovered the fraud when she was 22 years old and couldn't rent an apartment due to destroyed credit." "She's lying," my father said flatly. "Is she?" Rodriguez pulled out a forensic handwriting analysis report. "We had 3 certified handwriting experts examine signatures on 14 different loan applications and credit card forms, all supposedly signed by Danielle Howard. All 14 signatures were determined to be written by the same hand, a hand that does not match Danielle's verified signature, but does match exemplars of your handwriting, Mr. Howard. The experts are prepared to testify to this in court with a certainty level of 98.7%. My father's attorney shifted uncomfortably. "That's not conclusive." "We also have security camera footage," Rodriguez interrupted, bringing up a video on her tablet. "This is from First National Bank, dated September 22, 2020. That's you, Mr. Howard, filling out a credit card application. The name on the application is Danielle Howard. At that exact time, your daughter was in Portland, Oregon for a real estate conference. We have her hotel records, conference registration, and credit card receipts from Portland restaurants. She was 300 miles away when you were applying for credit in her name." The room went quiet. My father stared at the paused video showing his own face clearly visible as he sat at a bank desk, pen in hand. "This wasn't a one-time mistake," Rodriguez continued. "This was a systematic pattern spanning 20 years. The sophistication of the scheme, the duration, the multiple institutions involved, this demonstrates clear intent and premeditation. And 6 months ago, you made a payment on one of these fraudulent accounts, which means the crime is ongoing. Identity theft is a continuing offense, Mr. Howard. Every transaction resets the statute of limitations." My father tried another angle. "Even if I did use her information, she's my daughter. Family shares resources. This is a civil matter, not criminal." "It became criminal the moment you used her identity without consent," Park said from where he'd been standing by the door. "And it became far more serious when you demanded her property through physical violence. We have 15 witnesses who saw you strike your daughter across the face on December 25th. We have photographs of her injuries. We have testimony that you demanded she surrender her villa's keys. That's not a family disagreement. That's assault and attempted extortion." Down the hall in another interview room, my mother was having her own reckoning. She denied everything, at first claimed she knew nothing about the financial fraud, that Frank had handled all the money matters. But when presented with phone records showing she'd called Northwestern University pretending to be me when confronted with the box of intercepted letters found in her closet, when shown evidence of her role in coaching Amanda to sabotage my career, her denials crumbled into sobbing admissions wrapped in justifications about being afraid, about wanting to keep the family together, about not understanding how serious it was. Amanda was called in 2 days later. She arrived with Patricia Ruiz, the social worker who'd helped her find a pro bono attorney through the Women's Crisis Center. Amanda looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past few weeks, exhausted, terrified, visibly pregnant now at nearly 5 months. Detective Rodriguez was gentler with her, recognizing what Evelyn and I had come to understand: Amanda was both perpetrator and victim, weaponized by our parents, but ultimately responsible for her own choices. "Amanda, we have security footage from Nordstrom showing you using a credit card in Danielle's name in 2021. We have email correspondence where you activated these cards, set up online accounts, and made payments to keep them from defaulting too quickly. Can you explain this?" Amanda's attorney started to speak, but Amanda interrupted, her voice breaking. "They told me to do it. Mom said Danielle owed us, that she had plenty of money and wouldn't even notice. Dad said if I didn't help them, they'd cut me off and I'd end up with nothing. I was scared. I've never had a job, never supported myself. They controlled everything: where I lived, what I drove, even who I dated. I did what they wanted because I didn't know how to survive without them." "That may reduce your culpability," Rodriguez said carefully, "but it doesn't eliminate it. You were an adult. You knew it was wrong." "I know," Amanda whispered. "I know it was wrong, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The detectives documented everything. The interviews became official statements, evidence for the prosecution. Within a week, formal charges were filed. Frank faced 15 counts of identity theft, 12 counts of fraud, 1 count of assault, and 1 count of attempted extortion. Margaret faced 8 counts of fraud, 1 count of obstruction of justice, and multiple counts related to the intercepted correspondence and scholarship sabotage. Amanda, given her cooperation and evidence of coercion, faced 3 lesser charges of accessory to fraud, with a recommendation for probation rather than prison time if she continued cooperating. Evelyn called me the evening the charges were announced. "It's official. They're being prosecuted. Your evidence, your patience, your 15 years of documentation, it worked. The system is finally protecting you." I sat in my villa looking out at the ocean and felt something I'd been waiting my entire adult life to feel: validation. Not from my family, whose validation had always been conditional and poisonous, but from the legal system, from law enforcement, from the objective measurement of evidence and justice. The detectives believed me. The prosecutors believed me. The forensic experts confirmed what I'd always known. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't ungrateful or vindictive. I was a victim of crimes, and those crimes were finally being acknowledged and prosecuted. But the next revelation would shake even me. After the charges were announced, and the initial media storm had documented my victimhood in exhaustive detail, something unexpected happened. Journalists started asking a different question. Not, how did she survive this, but how did she thrive despite this? It started with a financial reporter from the Wall Street Journal who'd been following Sarah Chen's original story. He'd noticed something in my background that didn't quite fit the narrative of the struggling victim. I owned my villa outright, no mortgage. That was unusual for someone in their late 30s, especially someone who'd supposedly had their credit destroyed for years. He started digging. Public property records are accessible to anyone who knows where to look, and financial journalists definitely know where to look. What he found made him call Evelyn's office requesting an interview about Danielle Howard's investment portfolio. When Evelyn told me about the request, I hesitated. I'd never wanted attention for my financial success. I'd built my wealth quietly, deliberately, keeping it separate from my family drama. But Evelyn pointed out something I hadn't considered. The narrative right now is that you're a victim who finally fought back. That's true, but it's incomplete. If people understood how successful you actually are, they'd see the full picture that you weren't just surviving their abuse, you were transcending it. So I agreed to the interview. The resulting article published a week later was titled, "The Quiet Millionaire: How Danielle Howard Built a Real Estate Empire While Her Family Stole Her Identity." The journalist had done his homework. He'd traced my property holdings through public records, interviewed my tenants and contractors, even spoken with property managers in the 3 states where I owned buildings. The article revealed that I owned 14 residential properties, 6 apartment buildings with 4 to 8 units each, 5 single-family homes that I renovated and rented, and 3 commercial spaces that housed small businesses. My property management company, which I'd registered under an LLC to keep my personal name out of public records, generated approximately $180,000 in annual net income after expenses. Add to that my investment accounts index funds, dividend-paying stocks, municipal bonds, and my net worth was conservatively estimated at $2.3 million. The journalist had interviewed me about my strategy. "How did you build this on a destroyed credit score and without family support?" he'd asked. I'd explained the truth after discovering the credit fraud when I was 22. I'd spent 2 years disputing charges and rebuilding my score. By 24, I'd managed to get it up to 680, not great, but workable. I'd saved obsessively, living in a studio apartment with 2 roommates, driving a 15-year-old Honda, buying clothes at thrift stores. Every dollar I didn't absolutely need for survival went into savings. In 2010, when the housing market crashed and properties were being foreclosed everywhere, I had $43,000 saved. I bought my first property, a foreclosed duplex, for $38,000 cash at a county auction. I renovated it myself on weekends, learning plumbing and electrical work from YouTube videos. Within 6 months, both units were rented at $850 per month. After expenses, I was netting $1,200 monthly. I reinvested everything, bought another foreclosed property, then another. By 2015, I had 7 properties and enough income to quit my day job and focus on real estate full-time. The villa my grandfather bought me in 2013 was the only property I didn't earn myself, but it became my base of operations, the place I could live without paying rent, so that every dollar of rental income could be reinvested. "I never wanted to be rich," I'd told the journalist. "I wanted to be free. Money was the tool to ensure no one could control me." Every property I bought was another brick in a wall between me and the people who saw me as a resource to exploit. The article went viral faster than Sarah Chen's original piece. Within days, I was being profiled in Forbes, interviewed on financial podcasts, featured in segments about women building wealth independently. The narrative had shifted. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a success story, a self-made millionaire who'd built an empire with disciplined intelligence and strategic planning, while her family was actively trying to destroy her. Financial advisors analyzed my strategy on YouTube channels with hundreds of thousands of subscribers. She bought at the bottom of the market, she avoided lifestyle inflation, she leveraged rental income to scale her portfolio. This is textbook wealth building done by someone who understood that financial independence was survival. The contrast with my family became impossible to ignore. While I was buying foreclosed properties and living below my means, they were flaunting designer lifestyles funded by debt and stolen money. While I was building actual assets that generated income, my father was running Ponzi schemes and stealing from investors. While I was quietly becoming a millionaire, they were becoming criminals. My mother called me for the first time since Christmas. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "You had all that money," she said without preamble, her voice raw and accusatory. "All those properties, all that wealth, and you never told us." "Why would I tell you?" I asked calmly. "So you could steal more of it." "We thought you were struggling," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "We thought the villa was all you had. If you'd known I was wealthy, you would have tried to take more." I finished. "That's exactly why I never told you. You saw me as a resource. If you'd known how much resource there was, you'd have tried harder to extract it." She hung up without responding. I learned later through Amanda that my father's reaction had been even more visceral. When he'd read the Wall Street Journal article, he'd thrown the newspaper across the room and shouted that I'd been hiding my success from them, that I was selfish for not sharing my wealth with family. The irony was apparently lost on him. But what struck me most was how the community's perception shifted. People who'd once looked at me with pity, poor Danielle, the overlooked daughter, now looked at me with respect, even admiration. Mrs. Patterson stopped me in the grocery store to tell me she'd recommended my property management company to her grandson. Judge Anderson, who'd witnessed the Christmas confrontation, sent me a handwritten note. "You've proven that integrity and intelligence will always outlast manipulation and theft. Well done." The power dynamic wasn't just inverted. It was obliterated. My parents had spent 38 years trying to keep me small, dependent, controllable. And I'd spent 15 years systematically building a financial fortress that made me untouchable. But with that power came a responsibility I'd been avoiding. A choice I'd been putting off for years, long before the Christmas confrontation brought everything to a head. And with power came a choice. One I had avoided for years. The choice I'd been avoiding was whether I wanted closure or simply distance. Whether I needed to face them one more time or could walk away and let the legal system handle everything. When the letter arrived from my mother 2 weeks after my financial empire was revealed to the world, that choice became unavoidable. The envelope was cream-colored expensive stationery that my mother always used for important correspondence. Inside, her handwriting still elegant, despite the obvious tremor in some of the letters covered 2 pages. She begged for a meeting. She claimed she wanted to explain everything and make amends before it's too late. She said she understood now how much she'd hurt me and just wanted one chance to apologize face to face without lawyers or journalists or police between us. Evelyn advised against it. "They want something from you. This isn't about making amends, it's about manipulation. They've lost control of everything else, so now they're trying to control the narrative, control you." "I know," I said, "but I think I need to do this. I need to see them as they are now, not as the powerful figures who controlled my childhood. I need to walk into that house as an adult with power and walk out on my own terms." "Then I'm coming with you," Evelyn said. "As a witness, as protection, as family." We arrived at their house on a cold February afternoon. The landscaping, always meticulously maintained, showed signs of neglect: weeds in the flower beds, leaves piled in corners, the hedge overgrown. I'd called ahead so they were expecting us, but when my mother opened the door, I barely recognized her. She looked like she'd aged a decade in 2 months. No makeup, her hair pulled back carelessly, wearing yoga pants and an old sweater instead of her usual carefully coordinated outfits. The inside of the house was worse. Bills stacked on the kitchen counter, some marked with red past due stamps, moving boxes half-packed in the living room. The Christmas decorations, still up in January, now looked sad and desperate rather than festive. The air smelled stale, like windows that hadn't been opened in weeks. My mother tried to hug me. I stepped back, keeping physical distance. She froze, her arms dropping, and I saw something crumble behind her eyes. My father appeared in the doorway to his office, and the transformation in him was even more striking. The man who'd slapped me across the face on Christmas had been full of rage and entitlement, puffed up with his own self-importance. This man looked smaller somehow. His shoulders hunched, his expensive suit replaced with wrinkled khakis and a polo shirt. His bravado was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. I'd dressed carefully for this meeting, a tailored navy suit, my most professional heels, minimal jewelry. I wanted to look like what I was: a successful businesswoman, someone with resources and power, someone who couldn't be intimidated or manipulated anymore. The contrast between us was stark, and I knew they saw it. The daughter they'd tried to keep small had outgrown them in every possible way. We sat in the living room, Evelyn beside me on one sofa, my parents on the other 3 feet of space, and 38 years of damage between us. My father spoke first, and his tone made my skin crawl with its familiarity, that particular blend of self-pity and guilt-tripping he'd perfected over decades. "Danielle, this has gone too far. We're being persecuted. The media is destroying our reputation based on exaggerations and misunderstandings. Family should protect family, not do this." "Family should protect family," I repeated quietly. "That's interesting coming from you." "We made mistakes," he continued, warming to his theme. "I admit that. But we can make things right. We'll pay you back somehow. Set up a payment plan. We'll make amends. Just please drop the charges. Talk to the DA. Tell them you want to handle this privately as a family." "After all," my mother added, her voice breaking strategically, "we gave you life. Doesn't that count for something?" I looked at them both for a long moment. These people who'd shaped every fear I had, every doubt, every moment of feeling not quite good enough. And I realized they had no power over me anymore. Not legally, not financially, not emotionally. They were just two scared people facing consequences they'd never imagined would actually arrive. "You gave me life," I said, my voice calm and clear. "Then you spent 35 years trying to take it back. You stole my identity when I was 16. You sabotaged my scholarship to Northwestern. You blocked job offers and internship opportunities. You intercepted letters that could have changed my life. You used me as a financial tool, opening accounts in my name, destroying my credit, stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars. You poisoned Amanda against me, weaponized her jealousy, made her complicit in your crimes." My father tried to interrupt. "We were struggling financially. I could have stopped you years ago." I continued, not raising my voice, but not allowing interruption either. "When I was 28 and had enough evidence to prosecute. But I waited. I wanted you to show me over and over who you really were. I wanted to be absolutely certain. And you did show me. Every time you called asking for money, every time you used guilt to manipulate me, every time you chose yourselves over my well-being, and finally on Christmas, when I had something you couldn't touch, you tried to take it by force. You slapped me in front of witnesses. That was your final answer to who you are." I pulled a small USB drive from my purse and placed it on the coffee table between us. "This contains every voicemail you left me over the last 15 years. Every request for money. Every promise that it would be the last time. Every guilt trip about how I owed you for giving me life. I could have used this years ago. But I waited because I needed to be absolutely certain that if I walked away, I'd never doubt myself. I'd never wonder if I'd misunderstood or been too sensitive or overreacted. Now I know. You are exactly who I thought you were." I stood up. Evelyn stood with me. Margaret lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "Please, we'll lose everything. The house, our reputation, our future. Don't you care at all?" I looked down at her hand on my arm, then gently but firmly removed it. "I already lost everything. I lost it every time you chose yourselves over me. Every time you saw me hurting and made it worse. Every time you had a chance to love me and chose control instead. The difference is what you're losing, you stole. What I lost, I never actually had." I walked toward the door. Evelyn followed, her hand resting protectively on my shoulder. "We're your parents," my father said desperately. "That has to mean something." I paused at the door, looking back one last time. "It means you had every opportunity to do better. And you chose this. Every single day for 38 years, you chose this." Then I walked out. The cold February air hit my face clean and sharp. I heard the door close behind us, not slammed, just closed. Final. I'd thought that would be the end. That walking out of that house would be the closing punctuation on our relationship. But I'd underestimated their desperation. They refused to let me walk away clean. 6 days after I walked out of their house, Amanda called me. Her voice sounded strained, careful, like she was reading from a script someone else had written. "Danielle, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but Mom and Dad asked me to reach out. They want to do a proper apology, a real one, not like that meeting at the house. They want to take us to dinner somewhere neutral and formally make amends. They've been working with their attorney on how to make things right, and they want to present a plan that would help everyone move forward." The timing was suspicious. Their criminal trial date had just been set for June, 3 months away. Their attorneys had been in negotiations with the DA's office about a possible plea deal, but the DA wasn't budging. The evidence was too strong, the public attention too intense. This dinner invitation coming right now felt less like genuine remorse and more like desperation. "I don't know, Amanda," I said carefully. "I'm not interested in being manipulated again." "I understand, but I'll be there too. And you could bring Evelyn if that would make you feel safer. It's just dinner, just a conversation. If it goes badly, you walk away. But maybe they're finally ready to actually take responsibility." After we hung up, I called Evelyn immediately. She listened to Amanda's message, which I'd recorded automatically, and was quiet for a long moment. "It's a trap," she said finally. "But it might be a trap we can use against them. In our state, one-party consent recording is legal. If we go to this dinner with recording equipment and they try to manipulate you, pressure you, or attempt any kind of coercion, we document it all. It could be useful evidence of obstruction of justice, witness tampering, or continuing criminal conduct. So we spring their trap and turn it into our trap," I said. "Exactly." The dinner was set for the following Tuesday at Marcello's, an upscale Italian restaurant with private dining rooms. When Evelyn and I arrived, we were shown to a secluded space with soft lighting, expensive art on the walls, and a table set for 6. My parents were already there, along with Amanda and a man I didn't recognize, middle-aged, wearing a suit that was expensive but not quite right, like he'd bought it to look the part but didn't quite understand the role. "Danielle, Evelyn, thank you for coming," my mother said, standing to greet us. She was wearing makeup again, her hair styled, dressed in one of her good outfits. The performance had resumed. "This is Gerald Mitchell, our family attorney. He's been helping us figure out how to make things right." I shook his hand, noting how his palm was slightly damp, how his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Evelyn had already positioned her phone face down on the table next to her water glass, the recording app activated and running. My own phone was in my purse with a backup recording running. We weren't taking chances. My father cleared his throat. "Danielle, we asked you here because we realize we've made serious mistakes. We've had time to reflect on our behavior and we want to make amends. Gerald has helped us put together a plan that we think will address the harm we've caused while allowing our family to heal and move forward together." It was the most rehearsed thing I'd ever heard him say. Every word felt calculated, chosen by an attorney to sound apologetic without actually admitting criminal liability. My mother took over, pulling out a tissue and dabbing at her eyes. "We never meant to hurt you. Everything we did, we thought we were helping the family. We made poor financial decisions and we involved you in ways that were wrong. We see that now. We want to fix it." She was careful, so careful, never saying theft or fraud or forgery. Just poor decisions and involved you in ways that were wrong. Language that could be spun as misunderstanding rather than crime. Gerald Mitchell slid a document across the table. "We've drafted a settlement agreement that we believe addresses everyone's concerns. This would allow the family to resolve these issues privately, restore relationships, and avoid the trauma of a public trial." Evelyn picked up the document and began reading, her face impassive. I watched her eyes move across the pages, saw her pause at certain sections, saw the tiny tightening around her mouth that told me she'd found something problematic. After several minutes, she set the document down and looked at me. "May I have a moment to discuss this with my client?" "Of course," Gerald said smoothly. Evelyn leaned close and whispered, "It's worse than I thought. They want you to drop all charges and lawsuits in exchange for $500 a month for 20 years. That's a total of $120,000 for crimes that cost you over $300,000. But that's not even the worst part. Page 7, Clause 14. You'd have to grant them financial power of attorney to facilitate family asset management. Page 9, Clause 22. You'd transfer 40% ownership of the villa to Amanda as a gesture of reconciliation. This isn't a settlement. It's legal theft. I nodded slowly, then straightened and picked up the document again, pretending to read it carefully. I asked questions, pointed to sections, made it look like I was genuinely considering their offer. My father's expression grew more hopeful. My mother leaned forward eagerly. Even Amanda looked relieved, like maybe this nightmare could finally end. Then I asked the question we'd planned. If I agree to this settlement, what happens to the criminal investigation, the charges that have already been filed? Gerald Mitchell had clearly been waiting for this. His answer was smooth practiced. Well, I can't make any guarantees about prosecutorial decisions, of course. The DA has discretion. But historically, when families reach private settlements and issue a unified statement expressing mutual forgiveness and resolution, district attorneys are heavily influenced by that. The victim's wishes carry enormous weight. If you were to sign this agreement and make a statement to the DA that you don't wish to pursue criminal charges, that you believe your family has made appropriate amends, I would expect the case to be dropped or significantly reduced. There it was. The entire purpose of this dinner laid bare. They wanted me to sign away my rights, give them back control of my assets, and use that coerced agreement to manipulate the criminal justice system. So this isn't really about making amends, I said quietly. This is about avoiding prison. Danielle, my father said, his voice taking on that familiar edge of desperation mixed with anger. We're trying to do the right thing here. We're your family. Family forgives. Family protects each other. What's there to think about? I set the document down and looked at each of them in turn. My father, who'd stolen my identity for 20 years. My mother, who'd sabotaged every opportunity I'd ever had. The attorney who was helping them try to legally steal from me one more time. Even Amanda, who looked uncomfortable but wasn't speaking up to stop this. That's exactly what I need to think about, I said, standing. What family actually means. Evelyn stood with me, her phone still recording on the table. Then, with a subtle movement, she reached down and tapped the screen. And when the last sentence left their mouths, I pressed stop. Evelyn tapped the screen of her phone one more time, then picked it up and held it where everyone at the table could see it. This phone has been recording our entire conversation for the past hour and 20 minutes. The effect was immediate. Gerald Mitchell's face went from practiced calm to absolute white in the span of a heartbeat. My father froze mid-reach for his wine glass. My mother made a small, choking sound. In this state, Evelyn continued calmly, one-party consent recording is completely legal when there's reasonable belief of attempted coercion or self-protection from ongoing harassment. Given the active criminal investigation and extensively documented history of abuse and manipulation, we easily meet that standard. You can't, Gerald started. I can, and I have, Evelyn interrupted. And I should mention, Gerald, that offering a settlement explicitly designed to influence criminal prosecution decisions creates significant ethical problems for you personally. The state bar takes a very dim view of attorneys who facilitate witness tampering or obstruction of justice, even tangentially. She turned to my parents. But what's really damaging is what Amanda said about 20 minutes ago during dessert. Do you remember Amanda? You were talking about how nervous you were about this dinner, and you said, Dad told me if we could just get Danielle to sign something, anything the lawyers could work with it. Amanda's hand flew to her mouth. She'd been so anxious during the meal, chattering nervously, and she'd let that slip without thinking. I saw the realization hit her. She'd just provided audio evidence that this entire dinner was a setup, a legal trap designed to coerce me into signing away my rights and derailing the criminal case. This proves consciousness of guilt, Evelyn said, standing and gathering her coat. It proves you weren't seeking genuine reconciliation, but attempting to manipulate the legal process. And that, Frank and Margaret, is a crime. We left them sitting at that table, my mother crying into her strategically placed tissues, my father staring at Evelyn's phone like it was a bomb that had just detonated. Gerald Mitchell was already on his own phone, probably calling someone more senior to figure out how badly he'd just compromised himself professionally. Outside the restaurant, Evelyn immediately called Detective Rodriguez. "We have a recording you need to hear. Attempted obstruction of justice, possible witness tampering. Can you meet us?" 30 minutes later, we were at the police station playing the recording for Rodriguez and the assistant district attorney, a sharp woman named Catherine Walsh who'd been handling the prosecution. They listened to the entire thing without interruption, and I watched Catherine's expression harden with each passing minute. When the recording ended with Amanda's damning statement, Catherine sat back. We were considering a plea deal, reduced charges, lighter sentences given their ages, and claimed lack of criminal history. But this changes everything. How so? I asked. This shows ongoing criminal conduct. They're under investigation. They know they're under investigation, and instead of taking responsibility, they attempted to coerce you into a fraudulent settlement designed to make the charges go away. That's not remorse. That's continued threat to public safety. The judge needs to see this. Rodriguez was already making calls. "I'm sending units to the restaurant now. If they're still there, we'll bring them in for questioning on the new charges." They were still there. I learned later that my parents had stayed at that table for nearly an hour after we left, arguing with Gerald Mitchell about what to do next, whether the recording was actually legal, whether they could claim they'd been entrapped. By the time 2 police officers walked into Marcello's private dining room, my father had worked himself into a state of righteous indignation, insisting this was harassment, demanding to speak to their supervisor. The officers were professional and unmoved. "Mr. and Mrs. Howard, we need you to come to the station to answer questions about potential witness tampering and obstruction of justice charges. You're not under arrest at this time, but we strongly advise you to cooperate." The walk through the main dining room was witnessed by at least 30 people. Phones came out immediately. By the time my parents were being questioned in separate interview rooms at the police station, photos and videos were already circulating on social media. Frank and Margaret Howard being escorted by police through an upscale restaurant. My father red-faced and blustering, my mother holding tissues to her face. The humiliation was complete. The same community that had witnessed my public humiliation on Christmas, that slapped that demand for my villa that moment when 15 guests watched, and did nothing, now watched my parents face the consequences. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, though it brought no joy. Only a sad confirmation that justice, when it finally arrives, often looks less like triumph and more like inevitability. I was sitting in my car in the police station parking lot processing everything when Amanda found me. She must have followed us from the restaurant. Her face was blotchy from crying, her designer dress rumpled, all her careful makeup washed away by tears. "I didn't know they were going to do that," she said, her voice breaking. "I swear, Danielle, they told me it was a real apology, that they'd worked with the attorney to figure out a genuine way to make amends. I didn't know about the settlement trap until you and Evelyn started reading it at the table." I looked at her, this sister who'd spent 33 years being weaponized against me, who'd stolen from me, sabotaged me, competed with me in a game neither of us had chosen to play. "You never asked what they were planning," I said quietly. "Because part of you didn't want to know. That's how they've controlled both of us our whole lives. They trained you not to ask questions, not to look too closely to accept their version of reality, because questioning it was too dangerous." Amanda slid down to sit on the curb next to my car, her head in her hands. "I'm pregnant," she said suddenly. 8 weeks. I haven't told them yet. I was waiting until after this dinner because I thought if it went well, if we could be a family again, maybe they could be good grandparents, even if they were terrible parents. She looked up at me, and I saw in her eyes something I'd never seen before, actual clarity, painful and raw. "But they'll never be good grandparents. They'll do to my child what they did to us. They'll play favorites, create competition, use love as a weapon. And I just realized I don't want my child anywhere near them." For the first time in my life, I felt something like compassion for Amanda. Not forgiveness that would take years if it ever came at all, but recognition that she was also a victim just differently wounded. Then make sure your child never learns to fear love, I said. Break the cycle. That's the only revenge that matters. I drove away, leaving Amanda sitting under those harsh parking lot lights, alone with the truth she'd finally allowed herself to see. Back at my villa, I sat on my deck watching the ocean, thinking about the recording, the arrests, the long road that had led to this moment. Justice was being served. The legal system was working. My parents would face trial, likely conviction, probably prison time. But justice was not the end. I still had a life to rebuild. 3 months after that recording destroyed my parents' last desperate scheme, I bought a house 2 hours north of my hometown. It was nothing like the villa my grandfather had given me, smaller, older, weathered by salt air and ocean winds. But when I walked through it the first time and saw the wall of windows overlooking the Pacific, saw morning light flooding rooms that smelled like fresh paint and possibility instead of old secrets, I knew it was exactly what I needed. The house became my sanctuary. I planted a garden with vegetables I'd actually harvest and eat myself, not for show or performance. I painted the walls colors I liked, not colors that matched some decorator's vision of respectability. I bought furniture that was comfortable rather than impressive. And every morning, I sat on the deck with coffee and watched the ocean learning to breathe without the weight of their expectations crushing my chest. Dr. Lisa Chen's office was 10 minutes from my new house in a small building that overlooked a park. She was in her early 50s, warm but direct, with a PhD in family trauma and complex PTSD. Our first session, she'd asked me what I wanted from therapy. I want to stop feeling like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, I'd said. I want to sleep through the night without dreaming about my mother's voice. I want to believe that I deserve good things without wondering what the cost will be. Those are achievable goals, she'd said. But healing isn't forgetting what happened or forgiving people who hurt you. It's learning to integrate that pain into your story without letting it be the only story you tell yourself. The work was harder than fighting my parents had been. At least with them, the enemy was external, visible, attackable. This was internal archaeology, digging through layers of damage to find out who I might have been without them, who I could still become despite them. Some sessions I cried for the entire hour. Some sessions we sat in silence while I tried to find words for feelings I'd spent decades suppressing. Dr. Chen never rushed me, never offered false comfort, just witnessed my pain and helped me name it. On a Saturday afternoon in late April, I went to a small gallery opening in town. I wasn't particularly interested in art, but the invitation had been posted in the coffee shop I'd started frequenting, and I'd decided that part of building a new life meant trying things without overthinking them. I reached for the exhibition catalog on the table near the door at the exact same moment another hand did. We both laughed awkwardly and pulled back. "Please take it," the man said. He was older than me, probably late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm going to look at the paintings first anyway. Catalogs are for when you want to remember what you saw." "Are you sure?" I asked. "Completely." He smiled and moved toward a large abstract canvas on the far wall. 20 minutes later, I found myself standing next to him in front of a painting that looked like sunset through shattered glass. "What do you see?" he asked conversationally, not invasive, just curious. "I have no idea," I admitted. "I don't know anything about art, but I like how it makes me feel, like something broken can still be beautiful." "My wife was a painter," he said. "She taught me that art isn't about knowing, it's about feeling. She used to say paintings are frozen moments of honesty. This one feels honest to me too." We talked for another hour. His name was Richard Castellano. He was a widower. His wife had died 4 years ago from ovarian cancer. He'd been a civil engineer but retired early after her death, and now taught woodworking classes at the community center. He didn't ask what I did, didn't pry into my life, didn't seem to recognize me from any news coverage. He just talked about art and his students, and how strange it was to rebuild a life after loss. We exchanged numbers. Over the next few weeks, we met for coffee at the shop near my house, took walks along the beach where he pointed out tide pools I'd never noticed, went to a community theater production of a play neither of us had heard of. There was an ease with Richard that I'd never experienced with anyone. No performance, no agenda, no hidden costs to his attention. He was just present, steady, comfortable in his own skin, in a way that made me feel like I could be comfortable in mine. I started to imagine what healing might actually look like. The scholarship fund I'd established in my grandfather's name accepted its first 5 recipients. Foster kids pursuing education, getting the chances my mother had stolen from me. I reconnected with college friends I'd let drift away during the years of managing my family's toxicity. I laughed at Richard's terrible jokes. I slept through the night more often than not. Then one evening in early May, as I was chopping vegetables for dinner in my sun-filled kitchen, my phone rang. Amanda's name appeared on the screen. I hadn't spoken to her since that night in the parking lot, though I'd heard through legal channels that she was cooperating fully with prosecutors and had moved to an apartment on the opposite side of town from our parents. I almost didn't answer, but something in the timing felt urgent. "Danielle," Amanda's voice was shaking. "I need to see you. Tonight, if possible. There's something you have to know before it's too late and I can't tell you over the phone." "Amanda, I'm not interested in more family drama." "Please," she interrupted. "This isn't about them. This is about you. About something I found. About someone who's been trying to reach you." The line went quiet except for breathing. Then I heard another voice in the background, muffled but distinctly not Amanda's. "Who's with you?" I asked. "Someone who has information you need," Amanda said carefully. "Information about your past, about who you really are." My heart started racing. "Amanda, what are you talking about?" "Just meet us, please. I'll text you the address. Come alone if you want, or bring Evelyn. But come." She didn't come alone. Amanda's car pulled into my driveway 40 minutes later, just as the sun was setting over the ocean. I watched from my kitchen window as she got out of the passenger side, moving carefully, her hand supporting her lower back. She was visibly pregnant now, her belly rounded beneath a loose sweater. The driver's side door opened, and a woman in her 40s emerged, carrying a leather folder and wearing the kind of sensible clothes that suggested a professional who spent more time in crisis centers than courtrooms. I met them at the door. Amanda looked terrible, not just pregnant, but exhausted in a way that went bone deep. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup, dark circles under her eyes. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by Target basics that had seen too many washes. "This is Patricia Ruiz," Amanda said. "She's a social worker specializing in family preservation cases. She's been helping me for the past month." Patricia extended her hand. "Thank you for seeing us, Danielle. I know this is unexpected." We sat in my living room, the 3 of us, and I waited for Amanda to explain why she'd come, who else was supposed to be here, what information I supposedly needed. Amanda took a shaky breath. "I'm 20 weeks pregnant now, almost 5 months. At the restaurant, I was only 8 weeks, barely showing. That's why you couldn't tell." "I remember," I said carefully. "What you don't know is how Mom found out about the pregnancy. I hadn't told anyone yet. I was scared, planning how to break the news. But Mom went through my trash when she was at my apartment 3 months ago. She found the pregnancy test. She never told me she knew." Amanda's hands twisted together in her lap. "Instead, she and Dad made a plan. They came to me a week later with this story about how they wanted to make amends with you, how they'd worked with an attorney to figure out the right approach. They said if I helped them secure your villa, if I convinced you to meet them to consider their settlement offer, they'd support me through the pregnancy. Financially, emotionally, everything I'd need as a single mother." "But that wasn't the real plan," I said. "No." Amanda's voice cracked. 2 weeks ago, I went to their house to pick up some things I'd left there. They didn't know I was there. I heard Dad on the phone with that attorney, Gerald Mitchell. He said once she signs over the deed, we'll make Amanda choose the baby or her inheritance. Either way, we win. He was laughing, Danielle. Laughing about forcing me to choose between my child and financial security. I felt sick. They were going to use your baby as leverage. Not just leverage, control. Forever. If I kept the baby, they'd hold money over my head constantly. If I gave up the baby, they'd make sure I knew it was my choice, my failure. They were setting a trap for both of us. They'd get your villa, and they'd own me completely through my child. Amanda was crying now, tears streaming down her face. They never cared about me or the baby. We were just tools to get your property. Patricia spoke for the first time. That's when Amanda reached out to the Women's Crisis Center where I work. She was terrified, financially destroyed, emotionally devastated. But she was also finally ready to break the pattern. I've lost everything, Amanda said quietly. My fiancé left when the scandal hit the news. He said he couldn't handle being associated with that family. I lost my marketing job because the company didn't want the negative publicity. My credits destroyed because I was on several of their accounts. I'm facing bankruptcy. I had to move into a subsidized apartment for low-income pregnant women. Everything I thought made me special, made me better than you. It was all built on their lies and stolen money. And now? I asked. Now I'm in therapy twice a week, Amanda said. I'm attending parenting classes. I'm working with Patricia to build a safety plan so my child never experiences what we did. I'm applying for every job that will take someone with a high school diploma and no recent work history. I'm starting over at 33 with nothing. Patricia pulled papers from her folder. Amanda is genuinely trying to break the cycle, but she's facing a custody evaluation. The court wants to ensure the child won't be in an unstable environment. A letter from you confirming that Amanda is taking responsibility and actively working toward change would help her case significantly. I looked at my sister. This woman who'd stolen from me sabotaged me, been weaponized against me since childhood. Part of me wanted to say no, to let her face the consequences alone. But I thought about that unborn child, about the cycle of abuse that had destroyed both of us in different ways, about my grandfather's words that I was meant to break free and build something better. You were a victim too, Amanda, I said finally. Not the same as me. You made choices I wouldn't have made. But you were damaged in your own way, manipulated from childhood to see me as competition rather than family. I can't forget what you did. I don't know if I can ever fully trust you, but I won't let your child suffer for your mistakes. Thank you, Amanda whispered. One condition, I said. You commit legally if necessary to keeping this child completely away from Frank and Margaret. Even after their release, even if they change, even if they claim they've reformed. The cycle ends here. They'll never meet my baby, Amanda said. That's a promise. Patricia nodded approvingly and made notes in her folder. Then Amanda reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope, cream-colored and slightly worn, as if it had been carried around for days. There's one more thing, she said. I found this when I was clearing out my apartment in a box of old papers Mom gave me years ago. I don't know why it was mixed in with my stuff, but it has your name on it. She handed it to me. My name was written across the front in my mother's distinctive handwriting. Then Amanda handed me a sealed envelope, with my name written in my mother's handwriting. My hands were shaking as I took the envelope. The paper was worn at the edges like it had been opened and refolded many times. My mother's handwriting hadn't changed in decades, that precise, slightly slanted script she'd learned in Catholic school. The same writing that had signed permission slips and birthday cards and apparently hidden truths I'd never been meant to discover. I opened it carefully. Inside were several documents. The top one, a laboratory report from GeneTech Diagnostics, dated June 15, 2005. Paternity test results was printed across the header in bold letters. I was 18 years old in June 2005. I'd just graduated high school and was preparing to start at the state university. In the fall, my dreams of Northwestern already stolen by my mother's phone call to the scholarship committee. The results were clinical definitive, probability of paternity, 0%. Frank Howard is excluded as the biological father of Danielle Marie Howard. I read it 3 times before the words made sense. Frank wasn't my father. The man who'd raised me, who'd signed my birth certificate, who'd slapped me on Christmas, he wasn't my biological father. And he'd known since I was 18. Beneath the lab report was a handwritten note on Frank's personal stationery, dated the same week as the test results. His handwriting was aggressive, pressed hard into the paper. Confirmed. M's daughter is not mine. The resemblance to him is undeniable. No wonder she excels his intelligence, not my mediocrity. Margaret swore for 18 years that Danielle was mine. She lied. The question now, do I expose the lie and lose everything reputation business, the life I've built? Or do I stay silent and make them both pay for this betrayal in other ways? I choose revenge. I felt Amanda's hand on my shoulder, but I couldn't look up from the papers. There were more letters beneath older ones written before the DNA test when Frank was still just suspicious. One from 1990 when I was 3 years old. I see him in her face. The way she thinks, analyzes challenges, that's not from me. M swears she's mine, but I know. I know. If I leave, I lose everything reputation, business, respect. So I'll stay. I'll raise her. But I'll make goddamn sure she never flies too high, never proves she's better than my actual children, never makes me look like the fool who raised another man's genius kid. Another from 2006, a year after the DNA confirmation. Every scholarship Danielle wins is a reminder of my inadequacy. Every achievement is proof M loved him more than me. So I'll clip her wings. I'll burden her with debt. I'll make sure she knows without ever saying why that she will never escape my shadow. This is my revenge. Long, slow, perfect. I set the letters down because I couldn't hold them anymore. My hands were shaking too badly. 38 years of abuse suddenly had a different context. Frank hadn't just been a greedy, controlling father. He'd been a man raising another man's child, knowing it and punishing me for the crime of existing as proof of his wife's betrayal. "There's one more thing," Amanda said softly, pulling out a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local Teacher Dies in Highway Collision." The article was dated November 12, 1986. The victim's name was Marcus Grant, age 32, a high school social studies teacher described by colleagues as brilliant, dedicated, and beloved by his students. He'd been engaged to be married in October, but the wedding had been postponed. He died when his car was hit by a drunk driver on Interstate 5. "That's Evelyn's last name," Amanda whispered. "Grant." My breath caught in my chest. I stood up the papers scattering and pulled out my phone with shaking hands. I called Evelyn and somehow managed to say, "I need you to come to my house, now, please." She arrived 50 minutes later, breaking every speed limit between our houses. I met her at the door and wordlessly handed her the newspaper clipping. Evelyn looked at it, and for the first time since I'd known her, her composure completely shattered. Tears streamed down her face as she sank into my couch, the clipping held in both hands like something precious and unbearably painful. "Marcus was my fiancé," she said, her voice breaking. "We were going to be married in the fall of 1986. He was a high school teacher, brilliant, kind, passionate about education and social justice. He believed every student deserved a chance regardless of where they came from. Your mother was his student teacher that spring. She was beautiful, ambitious, working her way through college. I introduced them." She laughed bitterly through her tears. "I introduced them." "They had an affair," I said. "She was 22. He was 32. I didn't know until after he died. Margaret came to his funeral sobbing, and I thought she was just grieving a mentor. I didn't know she was grieving the father of the child she was carrying. She married Frank 6 months later. You were born 7 months after the wedding." I sat down next to Evelyn, the weight of this truth settling over me. "I'm Marcus's daughter. When I saw you 8 years ago at the law firm, I saw his eyes. The exact shade of gray-green, his expressions, the way you tilt your head when you're thinking deeply about something, the way you pause before answering, making sure you have the right words. All Marcus." She looked at me. Really looked at me, seeing someone different now. I couldn't prove it. I had no right to DNA evidence. But I knew. In my heart, I knew. That's why I've protected you like my own, because you are. You're the daughter of the only man I ever loved. And I'll be damned if I let Margaret's shame and Frank's revenge destroy what's left of him in this world. I thought about my grandfather's letter, about how he'd said I had integrity and courage, about how he'd left everything to me, bypassing his own daughter. Had he known too? Had he suspected the truth? Everything made terrible sense now. Frank's escalating cruelty after 2005. Margaret's desperate need to control me, to keep me from succeeding too publicly, from drawing attention that might make people see the resemblance to a man who'd died before I was born. The way they'd both seemed to hate me more the more I achieved, as if my success was a personal insult rather than a natural thing to celebrate in a child. I wasn't abused for anything I'd done. I was abused for existing. For being living proof of my mother's affair and my father's Frank's humiliation. I knew then exactly what I needed to do next. What I needed to do next was see this through to the end. Not just for me anymore, but for Marcus Grant, the father I'd never known. For my grandfather who'd tried to protect his granddaughter from the poison in his own daughter's heart. For every person Frank and Margaret had hurt in their desperate attempts to maintain a life built on lies. The trial began in early June, 6 months after that Christmas slap that had started everything. I sat in the courtroom every day, watching the prosecution methodically present the evidence I'd spent 15 years collecting. Bank records, forged signatures, audio recordings, witness testimony, the forensic accountant's charts showing the pattern of theft, the handwriting expert explaining with scientific certainty that Frank had signed my name on 14 separate loan applications. Frank's attorney tried to paint it as a family misunderstanding, tried to claim that informal money sharing was normal in families. But the jury saw through it. On June 28th, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts: identity theft, fraud, attempted extortion, obstruction of justice. Frank received 5 years with possibility of parole after 3. Margaret received 3 years with parole eligibility after 18 months, the lighter sentence attributed to her age and what the judge called her lesser direct role, though I knew better. She'd been the architect of the psychological abuse, the one who'd sabotaged my opportunities and weaponized my sister against me. But the justice system had spoken, and I had to accept it. Amanda, who'd testified against them with devastating honesty, received 2 years probation and 300 hours of community service. She'd stood in that witness box and detailed every manipulation, every lie, every scheme they'd made her participate in. I saw our mother's face when Amanda described the pregnancy trap, the only time Margaret showed anything resembling shame during the entire trial. The civil case concluded a week later. $340,000 in restitution plus legal fees to be paid from the forced sale of their assets. The house I'd grown up in, with its Christmas lights and oppressive atmosphere, sold at auction for less than they'd paid for it. Frank's business assets were liquidated. They declared bankruptcy. Everything they'd built through theft and manipulation was gone. I felt no triumph watching their empire crumble. Just a quiet sense of completion, like a long illness finally running its course. The probate court hearing happened in July. Evelyn presented the authentic will, the forged replacement, the evidence of Frank's attempted bribery of the court clerk. The judge invalidated the fraudulent will and officially recognized me as sole heir to my grandfather's estate. Evelyn, who'd been named executor in the original will, released funds that had been held in legal limbo for 15 years. $800,000, including accumulated interest. My grandfather's final gift protected all this time, finally reaching the granddaughter he'd tried to save. I established the Marcus Grant Memorial Scholarship that same week, full rides for foster children pursuing teaching degrees. The application asked for essays about overcoming adversity and the power of education to transform lives. My biological father, who died before knowing he had a daughter, would help dozens of kids escape the circumstances of their birth. I also set up a compensation fund for the 3 other victims of Frank's schemes, people who'd lost money in his fraudulent real estate deals but couldn't afford lawyers to fight back. It wasn't about publicity or redemption. It was about using what I'd reclaimed to help heal what they'd broken. After the final sentencing hearing, Evelyn asked me to meet her at a cafe near the courthouse. "There's someone I need you to talk to," she said. "Someone who's been part of this longer than you know." When I walked into the cafe and saw Richard sitting at a corner table, my heart both lifted and dropped. I'd been seeing him for months now, letting myself believe in something uncomplicated and genuine. But the serious expression on his face and Evelyn's careful positioning near the door told me complication was coming. I sat down. Evelyn sat beside Richard across from me, and the configuration felt like an intervention. "Danielle," Evelyn began. Richard wasn't a coincidental meeting. The world tilted. "What?" "6 months before you met him at that gallery, your father's business associates started making threats. Veiled ones, but threats nonetheless. I hired Richard as a private security consultant. He's a retired civil engineer, yes, but he also spent 20 years doing security assessments and threat analysis. I asked him to investigate who might retaliate against you when the case went public." I looked at Richard, feeling betrayed in a way I hadn't felt since Christmas. "You were spying on me." "No," Richard said firmly. "I was working in the background identifying potential threats. I never followed you, never surveilled you personally. I was tracking your father's associates, making sure none of them planned physical harm. For 3 months, that's all it was. And then I actually saw you at that gallery in September. I was there for legitimate reasons. My niece had a painting in the exhibition. When we reached for the same catalog, when we started talking about art and honesty, I felt something I hadn't felt since my wife died. Something real." Evelyn spoke softly. "He called me that night and said he couldn't continue the assignment, that he'd met you and couldn't be objective anymore." I agreed. Everything after that first meeting, the coffee dates, the beach walks, the theater, that was Richard choosing you, not Richard working for me. "But you lied," I said, my voice shaking. "You let me think it was fate or coincidence or whatever people call it when 2 people just meet. You let me trust you." "I know," Richard said. "And I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. But I was afraid you'd see everything that came after as tainted by how it started. I was afraid I'd lose you." I stood up, needing space, needing air. "I need to think about this." But there was one more person I needed to face. The person I needed to face turned out to be myself. I spent 3 days processing Richard's revelation, walking the beach alone, sitting in Dr. Chen's office trying to untangle genuine connection from strategic positioning. Richard gave me space, sending only one text: "I'm here when you're ready to talk, or not talk, whatever you need." I was still deciding what I needed when 2 letters arrived, both postmarked from different correctional facilities. One from Frank at the medium security men's prison 2 hours north. One from Margaret at the women's facility an hour east. 4 weeks into their sentences, they'd finally found a way to reach me. I almost threw them away unopened. But something made me sit down at my kitchen table and read them one after the other, like studying evidence of a crime I already knew had been committed. Frank's letter was typed 3 pages single-spaced. It began with Bible verses about forgiveness and redemption, about how the prodigal son was welcomed home, about how Christ taught mercy over judgment. Then it launched into a narrative I barely recognized. According to Frank, Margaret had orchestrated everything. She was the one obsessed with money and status. She'd pressured him to use my identity, threatened to leave him if he didn't help secure the family's financial future. He was just a weak man who'd gone along with a domineering wife. "I always loved you, Danielle," he wrote, "even after I learned you weren't my biological daughter. I could have abandoned you, but I stayed. I raised you. Doesn't that count for something?" The letter concluded with a request for me to write to the parole board supporting his early release. "Prison has taught me humility," he wrote. "I've had time to reflect on my mistakes, and I'm ready to make genuine amends. With your help, I could get out in 2 years instead of 3. Please show mercy. Be the bigger person." I set it aside and opened Margaret's letter. This one was handwritten, 5 pages of cramped script that looked like it had been written and rewritten multiple times based on the crossed-out words and insertions. She wrote about growing up in foster care, about sleeping in beds that smelled like urine, wearing donated clothes that never fit right, being treated like she was worthless. She described her terror of poverty, her desperation to build a life where she'd never be vulnerable again. "Everything I did came from that fear," she wrote. "I know I hurt you. I see now that I projected my shame onto you. When I saw you succeeding so easily without hiding who you were, it threatened everything I'd built on lies." The apology was buried in page 3. "I'm deeply sorry for the pain I caused, but please understand, sweetheart, I only wanted you to have a better life than I did. I wanted you to be safe, secure, never struggling like I struggled. I went about it all wrong, but my intentions were always love." The letter ended with a request that made my stomach turn. "Amanda tells me she's having a girl. I know I don't deserve to be called grandmother, but maybe after I've served my time and proven I've changed, you could bring the baby to visit. I could be the grandmother I should have been the mother. Everyone deserves a second chance." I sat with both letters for 3 days, feeling the old familiar pull. The conditioning ran deep, 38 years of being trained to meet their needs, to carry their emotional weight, to be the one who fixed things and kept the peace. Part of me wanted to write back, wanted to believe Frank's claims of humility or Margaret's framing of fear-based love. I called Dr. Chen and read both letters aloud in our next session. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Do these letters ask how you're doing? Do they inquire about your healing, your well-being, your life now that you're free of them?" I looked down at the pages spread across her coffee table. "No." "Do they acknowledge the full scope of what they did without qualification or excuse?" "No." Frank blames Margaret. Margaret blames her trauma. "Do they offer anything without asking for something in return?" I saw it then, clear as daylight. Both letters were performances designed to elicit specific responses. Frank wanted parole advocacy. Margaret wanted access to Amanda's baby, a new generation to control. Neither asked about me except as a means to their ends. I made my decision. I wouldn't respond. Not because I was being petty or vindictive, but because I finally understood that engaging would only restart the cycle. They hadn't changed. They'd just adapted their manipulation to fit their current circumstances. That evening, I wrote one sentence in my journal. I don't need their apology to move forward. Their validation was never mine to seek. Then I decided to make peace with my sister instead. Instead of responding to my parents' manipulative letters, I called Amanda and asked if she wanted to meet. We agreed on a small park near the beach, neutral territory where neither of us had history or wounds attached to the location. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench facing the ocean, her hands resting on her pregnant belly. She looked so different from the sister I'd grown up with. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple cotton maternity dress from Target. Her hair, once professionally highlighted and styled weekly, was pulled back in a plain ponytail showing gray roots she hadn't bothered to cover. The entitled air she'd carried her entire life had been replaced by something quieter, more tentative. She looked like someone learning to take up only the space she actually needed, rather than the space she'd been taught to demand. "Thank you for the letter," she said as I sat down beside her. "It helped. The judge granted me full custody with the stipulation that I continue therapy and parenting classes. Your statement about me taking active steps toward change made a difference." "You're welcome," I said carefully. We sat in silence for a moment, watching waves roll in. Then Amanda spoke again, her voice steady but sad. "I spent 30 years believing I was special, because they chose me over you. I got the attention, the praise, the resources. I thought that meant I was better, more valuable. But I finally understand being the chosen one just meant I was more useful to them. They didn't love me more. They just needed me for different things. They loved neither of us. They used both of us differently. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. We were both victims, I acknowledged. But we responded differently. I can't forget that you actively hurt me, even if you were manipulated into it. I know, Amanda said. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm just trying to understand so I don't repeat their patterns with my daughter. She told me things then that I hadn't fully understood about how the manipulation worked. Starting when she was about 7 years old, Margaret would only praise her when I failed or was criticized. If we both did well at something, Margaret would find fault with my success while elevating hers. When you got an A and I got a B, she'd say, Amanda worked so much harder for that B than Danielle did for her A. She was training me to see your failure as my success. I thought about all those years of competition that I'd never wanted the way every achievement felt hollow because it meant Amanda would be hurt or I would be diminished. She trained me to see my success as something that took love away from you. We were set up to be enemies from childhood. They did it to each other too, Amanda said. Dad controlled Mom through money. Mom controlled Dad through emotional manipulation. Their marriage was a power struggle and we became weapons in their war. Every time Dad wanted to hurt Mom, he'd use you, praise you to make her jealous, then withdraw support to prove he could. Every time Mom wanted to hurt Dad, she'd use me, make me fail to prove his family was flawed, make me succeed to prove she was the better parent. Understanding this didn't erase what Amanda had done, but it explained how a child raised in that toxic system might grow into an adult who hurt others without fully grasping the harm. We were both products of the same poison, just metabolized differently. What happens now? Amanda asked. With us, I mean. I chose my words carefully. I'm willing to support your efforts to be a healthy parent. But our relationship won't be what families are supposed to look like. I can be someone who wishes you well from a distance. But I can't be the sister who shows up for holidays and pretends the past didn't happen. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. I forgive you as part of my healing, but I'm choosing boundaries as part of my safety. Amanda nodded slowly. I understand. And honestly, distance is probably healthier for both of us. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not performing for their approval or competing with you. I've never just been myself. We sat together a while longer watching the ocean, two sisters who'd been weaponized against each other, finally choosing peace over proximity. As we stood to leave, Amanda placed her hand on her belly. I'm naming her Danielle, she said quietly. Not to guilt you or claim a connection I don't deserve, but because you're the strongest person I know, and I want my daughter to have a namesake who survived. The emotion hit me unexpectedly, tears pricking my eyes. I simply nodded, not trusting my voice. Then Amanda hesitated, looking out at the water. There's one more thing you should know. About Christmas night. About why they demanded the villa that specific night. Then Amanda revealed one final truth about the night everything changed. They knew about your real estate portfolio 3 weeks before Christmas, Amanda said. Someone at the county assessor's office leaked property records to Dad. He was furious when he realized you owned 14 properties that you were worth millions while they were drowning in debt from their legal fees and failing businesses. The villa demand wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated desperation. She pulled another envelope from her bag, this one thicker bulging with papers. I found these with the DNA test. Letters Mom wrote but never sent. I almost didn't bring them. But I think you need to understand who she was, even if it doesn't change what she did. The letters inside were dated sporadically across 25 years, written on different types of paper, notebook pages, stationery, even the back of grocery lists. A secret journal of my mother's conscience if she'd had one. The earliest, from 1995, when I was 8 years old, was written in her precise handwriting. I see Danielle succeeding, and instead of pride, I feel threatened. Why she's my daughter. I should want this. But every achievement reminds me of what I gave up. I was smart too. I had dreams too. But I chose this life, marriage, motherhood, respectability, and now I watch her choose differently, and it feels like judgment. Another from 1998. She won the science fair again. Frank didn't go. I told him we had Amanda's recital, but that was next week. I just couldn't bear to watch everyone praise Danielle while I stood there feeling like a failure. What kind of mother am I? The kind who knew she was hurting me and did it anyway. The self-awareness made it worse, not better. But the letter from 2001 made me physically sick. I was 14. I'd won a regional academic competition and qualified for a full scholarship program I'd never heard of. Today, I intercepted the scholarship notification, Margaret had written. Full ride to any university in the country. She's 14. This could change everything for her. And I hid it. I told her the mail came, but there was nothing important. I watched her face fall and felt relief. If she leaves for some prestigious school at 16, she'll realize she doesn't need us. She'll see our mediocrity clearly. And Frank will blame me. He already resents how brilliant she is, how much she reminds him of Marcus. I can't lose my husband and my daughter. So I'll keep her close the only way I know, by making sure she never discovers her full potential. I'd been 14, a child. And she'd stolen a full-ride scholarship that could have sent me to college 2 years early, gotten me away from them sooner, changed the entire trajectory of my life. And she'd done it consciously, deliberately, while watching my disappointment and feeling relieved. The final letter was dated December 3rd, 3 weeks before the Christmas slap. Frank wants to take Danielle's villa. He says we're entitled because we raised her. I know this will destroy what's left of our relationship, but I'm scared. We're drowning financially. I'm old and tired, and I realize I've built nothing real, no genuine relationships, no true accomplishments. Just a house of cards made from lies and control. Danielle built an empire from nothing. She is everything I could have been if I'd been brave enough. But it's too late for me now. So yes, I'll help Frank take the villa. Not because we deserve it, but because I can't face the truth that my daughter surpassed me because she was stronger, not because I failed to stop her. I folded the letters carefully and put them back in the envelope. My mother had known she was destroying me. She'd documented it in real time, and she'd chosen her own fear over my well-being every single time. Understanding didn't undo the damage. It just explained why some people choose to destroy what they cannot become. And so, I made my final decision. My final decision was to choose myself. Not in the selfish way my parents always accused me of when I set boundaries, but in the way my grandfather and Marcus Grant would have wanted, by claiming my own identity, my own name, my own future. I filed paperwork to legally sever all financial ties with Frank and Margaret Howard. They could never claim me as a dependent, never use my name for insurance or credit, never contest my estate. And then I filed for a name change. The ceremony was held in a small courtroom on a Tuesday morning in September. Just 5 people attended: Evelyn, Dr. Chen, Richard, Patricia, and me. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Alice Brennan, who'd followed my case in the news. She looked at the paperwork and then at me. Danielle Marcus Grant, you're taking your biological father's name and your grandfather's name. Yes, Your Honor. And leaving Howard behind entirely? Yes. Judge Brennan smiled. Names are powerful things. We're given them at birth and we carry them like luggage we never chose. But the law recognizes that sometimes we need to set down that luggage and pick up something that actually fits who we are. Today you're choosing who you are. That's real freedom. She signed the order. Congratulations, Ms. Grant. I walked out of that courtroom as Danielle Marcus Grant, and something inside me felt lighter than it had in 38 years. The scholarship fund expanded significantly after that, not just for foster children anymore, but for any young person escaping family abuse who wanted education as a path to freedom. Patricia agreed to work part-time helping me identify and vet candidates. We gave out 12 scholarships that first year, full rides that would change lives the way mine could have been changed if my mother hadn't intercepted that notification when I was 14. I also started volunteering with a legal aid organization that helped identity theft victims. I met so many people, mostly women who'd been financially abused by family members, parents who'd stolen their children's identities, siblings who'd opened credit cards in each other's names, partners who'd destroyed their spouse's credit out of spite. The shame kept most of them silent for years, just like it had kept me silent. I started speaking at community centers, writing op-eds about the need for better legal protections. My public presence shifted from victim to advocate. I wasn't defined by what they'd done to me anymore. I was defined by what I was doing to help others. Then one October evening, Evelyn arrived at my house unannounced. I knew immediately something was wrong. She looked exhausted in a way I'd never seen, and when she sat down on my couch, she moved carefully like someone whose body hurt. "I need to tell you something I should have told you months ago," she said. "I have stage 3B lung cancer. I was diagnosed 8 months ago, right before your Christmas call." The world stopped. 8 months. You've known for 8 months. The doctors gave me 12 to 18 months with treatment. I'm at month 9 now. Why didn't you tell me? I felt betrayed, scared, devastated all at once. Because you needed me to be strong, Evelyn said gently. You were fighting for your life. I chose to use my remaining time to help you win that fight. I've lived 72 good years. What's a few months of discomfort compared to giving you a lifetime of freedom? Tears were streaming down my face. You should have told me. Maybe. But then I got to meet you, really meet you. I got to know Marcus's daughter. I got to do what I couldn't do for Margaret, help someone I love escape the prison of shame and fear. She took my hand. That's enough, Danielle. That's more than enough. And then came the moment I truly understood what freedom felt like. Freedom felt like sitting beside Evelyn's hospice bed 14 months after her diagnosis, holding her hand as afternoon light streamed through the window overlooking the garden she'd insisted on being able to see. We'd spent those final weeks talking about everything we'd never had time for before Marcus, and what he'd been like, how he'd made Evelyn laugh, how he'd believed every student deserved dignity, Margaret's childhood and the trauma that had twisted into cruelty, Evelyn's career and the cases that had mattered most, the people she'd saved and the ones she couldn't. What makes a life well lived? Her last words to me, whispered through labored breathing, were, "You gave me the gift of family at the end. Thank you." Then she closed her eyes and simply stopped. Peaceful. Complete. Her funeral filled the largest church in town. Former clients she'd helped escape abuse. Young lawyers she'd mentored who now fought for justice themselves. Community activists, judges, social workers, and a surprising number of people who simply said she'd changed their lives by believing them when no one else would. I delivered the eulogy somehow, finding my voice to say what needed to be said. That Evelyn had taught me strength doesn't mean you never break it, means you choose what you'll build from the broken pieces. 6 weeks later, I stood at her grave in the cemetery where my grandfather was also buried. 2 people who'd loved me without condition, who'd tried to save me in the only ways they knew how. I placed flowers on both graves and whispered, "I'm going to be okay. You both made sure of that." Richard gave me space during those months of grief, never pushing, just present when I needed him. But the question of what we were, what we could be, still hung between us. We started couples counseling with a therapist who specialized in trust repair. I was supposed to observe for 3 months, Richard explained in one of our sessions. Make sure your father's associates weren't planning physical retaliation. File my report. Move on. Then I met you at that gallery, and you said something about not knowing anything about art, but knowing what made you feel something. And I realized you'd spent your whole life being told what to think and feel, and you were finally learning to trust your own perceptions. That moment I stopped seeing an assignment. I saw someone I wanted to know, the real you. I spent 38 years waiting for truths to come out, I told him. I can't build a new life based on another hidden truth, even if it started with good intentions. He showed me everything. The actual report he'd filed with Evelyn, clinical professional, noting threats neutralized but containing nothing personal about me. He introduced me to his late wife's family, who welcomed me with stories about who he'd been during their marriage, how he'd grieved, how he'd slowly rebuilt a life that felt worth living. He gave me space to decide without pressure. It took 3 months, but I chose to continue. Not because the beginning was perfect, but because everything after that first meeting had been honest, and I'd learned that imperfect beginnings don't doom relationships if both people commit to truth afterward. On December 25th, exactly 1 year after the Christmas slap that had changed everything, I sat at my desk in my sunlit coastal home and opened my journal. Dr. Chen had encouraged me to write on significant dates to mark how far I'd traveled. A year ago, I wrote, I was a daughter who'd been conditioned to believe love meant sacrifice, that family loyalty meant accepting abuse, that success was selfish if it outshone others. I was 38 years old and still carrying the weight of their expectations like stones in my pockets, dragging me down. I paused, looking around my living room. Photos of Richard and me hiking through redwood forests. A painting Amanda had sent after her daughter was born, an ocean sunset with the words "New Beginnings" signed in the corner. The bulletin board covered with thank you letters from scholarship recipients. Evelyn's law school graduation photo on the mantel beside one of my grandfather. Today, I continued, I'm someone different. I own my name. I own my story. I've learned that revenge isn't about destroying others, it's about refusing to let them destroy you. I didn't burn my past out of hatred. I burned it for light so I could finally see who I was underneath all their expectations and cruelty. I closed the journal and poured coffee, watching through my windows as morning sun turned the ocean silver. I opened my laptop to review scholarship applications, 23 this month, each one a person trying to escape circumstances they didn't choose, each one deserving a chance. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Dinner tonight, I'll cook. Another from Patricia. Amanda's baby is 6 months old today. She sent a photo. Another from Dr. Chen. Proud of how far you've come. See you Thursday. I smiled, not because I'd forgotten the pain or forgiven the unforgivable, but because I'd learned to carry my history without letting it carry me. I'd built something my family never gave me, a home where love wasn't conditional, where success was celebrated, where mistakes didn't equal rejection, where I could finally just be myself without apology or performance. Outside, ocean waves crashed in their eternal rhythm. Inside, I was free. Because sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk away from the life that tried to destroy you. That's Danielle's story. From the Christmas dinner where a slap shattered the last illusion of family, to the courtroom where justice was finally served, to the quiet coastal home where she learned what freedom actually feels like. It's a story that took 38 years of abuse and 15 years of strategic planning to resolve, but in the end, it wasn't really about revenge at all. It was about reclamation. I want you to think about something for a moment. How many of us carry the weight of family expectations that were never really about us? How many of us have been trained to accept mistreatment as love, to see our own success as selfishness, to apologize for taking up space in rooms where we absolutely deserve to be? Danielle's story is extreme in its details, but the core truth resonates with so many of us. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones we most need protection from. What strikes me most about Danielle's journey is not the dramatic courtroom victories or the exposed crimes, though those certainly provide satisfaction. It's the quiet moments of choice. The decision to document everything for 15 years instead of reacting impulsively. The choice to use her reclaimed wealth to help others instead of just enjoying her vindication. The courage to change her name, to literally choose her own identity after spending decades carrying one that was forced upon her. The wisdom to recognize that Amanda was both perpetrator and victim, deserving of boundaries, but also of a chance to break the cycle. The strength to sit with Richard's complicated beginning and choose trust anyway, not because the start was perfect, but because the honesty afterward was real. And perhaps most powerfully, the decision to walk away from her parents' final manipulation attempts without needing their apology or acknowledgement. That's the kind of freedom most of us only dream about, the ability to release people who hurt us, without waiting for them to validate our pain or admit their wrongs. Danielle's story also forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about family financial abuse. It's far more common than we discuss. Adult children whose parents steal their identities, siblings who open credit cards in each other's names, financial manipulation disguised as family support. The shame keeps victims silent, and the cultural narrative that family should always forgive and stay together traps people in cycles of exploitation. Danielle broke that silence, and in doing so, she gave permission to thousands of others to name what was happening to them and seek help. Now I want to hear from you, because stories like this don't end when the video stops. They continue in the conversations we have, the reflections we share, the courage we find to face our own difficult truths. Drop a comment below and tell me. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who couldn't respect them? Have you experienced financial manipulation or psychological abuse from people who claimed to love you? What would you have done differently if you were in Danielle's position? Would you have waited 15 years to build an airtight case, or would you have acted sooner? Do you think Amanda deserved a second chance, or should Danielle have completely cut ties? And here's the question I'm most curious about. Do you think Danielle should have told Richard the truth about knowing his initial involvement was work-related, or was accepting his honesty enough? If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own relationships, or gave you language for experiences you've struggled to name, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because I share stories like this one every week. Stories about people who faced impossible situations and found unexpected strength. Stories that remind us we're not alone in our struggles, that justice is possible, even when it takes time, and that the most powerful form of revenge is often simply refusing to let toxic people define who we become. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's dealing with family dysfunction, someone who's questioning whether they're overreacting to mistreatment, someone who needs permission to choose themselves. And if you made it all the way to the end of Danielle's 25-part journey, leave a comment that just says, "I'm free," so I know you were here, and this story meant something to you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk away from the life that tried to destroy you. You deserve better. You always did.